Good morning, everyone. How are you? Okay, so I just have little tidbits to pick up on with when it comes to finishing up Mormonism and Judeo-Freemasonry. I have one more or perhaps two more videos that I'd like to share. And excuse me, I'm a little bit distracted, and I have to go through some papers which I do not think I'm going to be reading. I'm not going to be reading. I don't have time to read them, so I can show these two last videos. And I just need to fix up my website so that everything on Mormonism and Judeo-Freemasonry is up on Be Wise's Serpents, talking about that. I'm on partial shadow ban. It's hard to find my videos. It can be impossible to find the first three. So if you go to vincentbrunoshadowban.blogspot.com, you can find them. That's at the bottom of the screen and in the description box. If you would like to find the videos that I play, or if you would like to find the papers that I read, the only ones you can't find are Billy Crone, the Billy Crone ones, and but you can find all the videos and papers there in their PDF form or whatever. And it's at bewisesserpents.blogspot.com is where you can find all of the papers I read. That's my Mormonism. That's my blog on Judeo-Freemasonry, and part of it is on Judeo-Freemasonry and Mormonism. And so if you want everything that you found here except for those Billy Crone videos, you can find them at bewisesserpents.blogspot.com. And my email is vincent.bruno.1229@gmail.com. If you're have any questions, or if you have any information you would like to send me, I'd like to start collecting information and, stuff like that. And obviously, I've already done lots of collection of information, but I'm always looking to collect more. And maybe if there's any ex-Mormons out there that have watched this and have found it to be interesting and would like to collaborate in some way to amplify this message, really, the Freemason background and the Jewish background of Mormonism, and why that's important, and especially in regards to the Noahide laws. And we saw that there's already some inkling in saying Mormons are Noahides, which they're not. And then trying to say that the Noahide laws, a similar set, appear in the Book of Mormon is scary. The Mormon church is not nobody's. The Mormon church has power. We don't need to add the Mormon church to the program of Noahidism. It's going to happen anyway, but I mean, we should at least, be wise as serpents, be forewarned as forearmed, So anyway, I'm just going to play these videos, and I got to work on the website. Okay, bye.
Our Professor live show. I have a couple of really good guests tonight that I'm really excited to have. But in the meantime, before we show their lovely faces, we are going to get this show on the road so we can have a good night of learning. Sorry, I was going to adjust that volume. I blew it again. Everyone's going to yell like crazy at me. Oh, well, it is the Backyard Professor show after all. Okay, you guys, I've got a few news items first, but I am going to bring on my guests because they deserve to see you, and you definitely deserve to see them. So let's see our guests, Cheryl Bruno and Dr. Nick Litursky, authors of the book Method Infinite. How you two doing tonight?
Very good.
Wonderful, thanks.
Good, wonderful. I have heard some interesting news I'll share with you guys and with the audience. This last week, India has done something extremely interesting. They have produced a 15-foot tall statue of Joseph Smith, the Mormon prophet, in their, I think it's called the Hall of Peace, something like that. But wow, what an interesting situation on that. They've been going crazy on the message boards about this thing. And I asked Joseph in a dream that I had, I said, so what do you think of the statue? And this was his reaction. He got a pretty big smile out of it. So he was quite happy about that. So anyway, okay, that's enough goofing off, except for one more thing.
I wonder if they'll let us use that to make casts to put on top of our temples.
Right? There you go. Good point, Cheryl. Yeah.
My initial thought was that that's not exactly what Moroni told him his name would be used as. So
That's a good argument, right? Well, this is the first time I've had two guests on at once, so you two get a fight out for the attention and talk, but we will get to this subject. We will start with your information on Dan Vogel and your response to several of Dan Vogel's ideas. Cheryl has produced some lovely slides that we've got. However, I was given a meme that I'm going to share. I'm not sure if Jeff Bradshaw is here tonight. If he is, welcome, Jeff. We're having fun, a little bit at your expense, but it's not my meme, but this was produced. So I wanted to share that with you. I've been talking with Jeff, and he recognizes that you guys have kind of been working in cahoots in the background somewhat with the book and book reviews and all. So anyway, I might have him on the show. I'm gonna get with him over the Christmas holiday, and he's expressed an interest in potentially at least doing a show or a podcast. So
everyone deserves their chance.
What's that?
Everyone deserves their 5 cents.
Yeah, that's what I love about it.
For best results, offer him lunch. Lunch is very important to Jeff.
Yes, he has had me out to lunch a few times. Yes, it's hard. It is. Hey,
I've had lunch with Jeff Bradshaw myself.
All right, you guys. So you wrote this book, and I didn't make a thumbnail of it. Method Infinite, and I
did notice that your thumbnail of me in your advertisement was a sexy pose from back in 2008, I think it was.
Is that? Oh wow! Well,
yes,
I think it's your Facebook page, and that was the best picture I could find of you. Because
well, thank you very much. I do look pretty good in it, but I'm not so scholarly, you know.
I tried to get the background out of the one where you're in the forest, and it kept taking out all your hair on the side of your head.
Oh,
And
okay.
so I took out.
We don't want that. We don't want that.
No, we
Okay, I,
need you-
I love that he slimmed me down considerably. If you notice, I'm propped.
Very flattering.
Nice V-shape.
Yeah.
photo, yeah.
Well, it looks like we're all here. I'm going to say hello to everybody. Trevor, Luke, my good friend Tom Miller, hello. Love all you guys. Let's see who else is hanging. Lamb Chop, Savannah Thompson, Mark Crispin. Yeah, baby. I've got to do that for Mark. Somehow we've jived, and I always do. Radio Free Mormon, good to see you, my friend. Newton Lemnos from Brazil. Barry Richens, thank you. Tim Rathbone, always good to see you. He's been a good guest. Dan Vogel, the man is in the house. He's been a good guest. And Radio Free Mormon has been a good guest. Peter Higgs, how are you? Abby Hayes, good to see you. Let's see, who else have we got real quick? It looks like you guys are holding the show. Jason Smith, good to see you. And then Mormon discuss. Oh, wait, that was me. Okay, so I said hi to all you wonderful people. Let's get this road on the show. Yeah, baby. Good job, Mark. I'm telling you. We're going to make a t-shirt just for him. So how would you two like to start? It's your show. It's your information.
Well, Kit, let's put up our first slide and we'll just jump right in. And what I'd like to do first is just tell you that I've taken notes on how many times did you have Dan on? 4, was it?
Let's see. I think Dan was on 4, and we're going to do another one in January where we will discuss I believe the Book of Mormon. Dan, if I'm wrong with that, correct me in the comments. But yeah, we'll talk about the Book of Mormon chapter in your book also.
Okay.
So then that'll
Dan,
give you guys a chance to come on.
I would just like to mention, before we really jump in, even though we clearly are going to disagree with Dan in some respects, I've always really admired his work. I mean, years ago, I completely got rid of my Mormon library. And as the few books that I have reconvened that have been really specific to my interests have turned out to be, a small collection, and about a third of it are Dan Vogel's works.
Yeah, that's it.
I have tremendous respect for his work. We happen to have some disagreements over the last 4 weeks.
That's all good.
And I also wanted to say that I'm very flattered that Dan chose to review our book in this way because he does not often review other books. And so I feel that, he took the book seriously enough to respond to it, and was very, very pleased that he did so. And so that's
Thank you for that. I was thrilled. I'm thrilled that him and I have become good friends, like all of us. And he was willing to come on my show. I've always admired his work as well. So now that we buttered him up, because we know he's here, let's kick his butt. I'm kidding, Dan. Calm down. Okay. Yeah, here's what he says. I don't review books.
Right. He does not.
Complimentary that he spent so much time on your book. Thank you for that. That's good.
Yes, I feel very flattered, and glad that he took it seriously, and that I was very his points were very well taken. I will talk about the things that I feel like he really had some good points for improvement, and then of course others that we disagree with. So
yeah, it's all good. I don't agree with any one single author I've ever read, and that's what makes this show so fun, is giving everyone their voices. So let's look at this first slide here.
Okay. So Dan talks a lot about one critique of our book is that he says that we have developed a meta-narrative around Joseph Smith and Masonry that makes it all make sense. A meta-narrative is an overarching account or interpretation of events and circumstances that provides a pattern or structure for people's beliefs and gives meaning to their experiences. So he says that's what humans do. They like to have things make sense, and so they put the structure up to form this meta narrative, and that's what he feels that we've done in Method Infinite. But this is a point that I am going to take issue with, because Nick and I, and also Joe as well, are trained in the scholarly method, and we are not apologists. Which, if you go to the next slide, I'll show you what an apologist is, because Dan also then compares people who make these meta narratives to apologists. And apologetics is the religious discipline of defending doctrines through systematic argumentation and discourse, reasoned arguments or writings in justification of a theory or religious doctrine. So they are starting, apologetics is where you start with what you believe, and then you prove it, right? And so this is not what we have done in this book, where we started with kind of an open mind, not knowing where this would go. And through the evidence, we came to some of our conclusions. And that is what a historian does. And Dan has done this in his books as well.
I was going to say, I want to show you an example of a meta-narrative that has been created through the course of an interpretation of the research. And here's that title.
Yes.
And this book ends with the declaration of a pious fraud. That in itself is a meta-narrative that develops out of the collective evidence. And that interpretive tool is both natural and useful. It would not be useful to just vomit evidence without coming up with a interpretation and an understanding of where that evidence leads.
I think one thing I liked about the book, what this book showed me is, and through the years I've kind of gained a better understanding through, of course, conversations with Joe and you, Cheryl, and you, Nick, and others, the incredible inclusion throughout the whole course of the late 1700s, all the way up through the Morgan Affair and beyond, the inclusion in the culture of Freemasonry. I thought that's what your book did so very well. And so you're saying that's not a meta narrative. You have discovered how deep the influence is.
Well, I'm not saying that it's not necessarily a meta narrative. I don't think we need to look at a meta narrative as being a bad thing. You know, like Nick said, Dan's book also provides a meta narrative. So meta narrative, he doesn't have to use that as like such a bad thing, and compared to apologetics, which it is not.
The irony here is, when I first began the research, I was a somewhat vigorously believing Latter-day Saint, and if there was any starting, predetermined meta narrative, it was my naive guess at the beginning that Freemasonry was somehow a prophecy of Joseph Smith, which, of course, the evidence made it clear that was not it, and that was a very naive starting place. But we followed the evidence rather than starting with an interpretation.
Right. So, so one of the things that Dan has said in his, he has talked before quite a bit about Freemasonry and the Book of Mormon, and he feels that the Book of Mormon is anti-Masonic. And in our book, we take issue with that and say that there are two views of, okay, here is some of the newspapers of the day talking about the Book of Mormon being anti-Masonic. And I think this is where Dan picks this up and other historians pick this up. We have Beadle saying Smith's new translation of the Old Testament is full of anti-Masonry. And then we have William Perkins. Billy Perkins says the Mormon Bible is anti-Masonic. So, and then, of course, they quote Martin Harris saying the Book of Mormon is the anti-Masonic Bible. But what Dan doesn't tell you is, if we go to the next slide, we also have newspaper articles of the day saying that the Book of Mormon is Masonic. And this is Eber D. Howe responding to Billy Perkins saying, "You appear not to be aware that some zealous Masons and several Republican jacks have beset Joe Smith for more light." And that's a Masonic phrase there, more light. "And perhaps you have yet to learn that the Mormon Bible was printed and sent forth to the world from a Masonic printing office under a Masonic or some other injunction of secrecy. You may also discover a very striking resemblance between Masonry and Mormonism." So there is disagreement among the people of the day whether the Book of Mormon is Masonic or anti-Masonic. And so what we do is we show that there are different ways of looking at Masonry that we feel that Joseph Smith took from some of the Masonic writings of the day, where you have pure Masonry and spurious Masonry. So you have a Masonry that has come down from the beginning and is true Masonry, and then you have an apostate form of it. And so the Book of Mormon shows both of these. They do show the apostate forms of Masonry, and then they also show, like Nephi, building a temple after the manner of Solomon. They show Smiths. They show the brother of Jared. They show all kinds of figures that can be said to be Masonic in this true or pure way. So the Book of Mormon shows Joseph's vision of how Masonry can be either a good thing or it can be apostate, right? And now I was really interested when the book came out. I was really interested to see what Dan Vogel would say about this, because he is known for saying that the Book of Mormon is anti-Masonic. So I was hoping that he would address this. But I felt like on your show, he did not dig into this point very strongly. I felt he just said, oh, they're making a meta-narrative, and dismissed that, that point. And I don't feel like he necessarily dug into it and took it seriously. So he says down here, the spurious Masons were not really Masons, but heathen mystery cults. Okay, let's address that. So Dan said in your podcast that George Oliver, who was the Masonic writer of the time, did not mean that spurious Masons were apostate 19th century Masons, right? And that's true. We agree with that. We agree that George Oliver did not mean that. However, Joseph Smith was interpreting George Oliver this way. So Dan doesn't understand that we're not saying George Oliver ever, felt that, the Illinois Lodge was spurious Masonry. However, Joseph Smith is the one that interpreted Oliver's words to mean this. So, do you have anything further to say, Nick? I feel like I'm talking a lot.
Okay.
It's all good.
Of course, keep in mind that George Oliver also goes back to the creation and identifies all of the biblical patriarchs as grand masters of Masonry, and specifically talks about the apostasy of Cain, and goes into this idea of a spurious Freemasonry. So while Dan is correct with regard to much of the later narrative and the later time frame, it has its origins in the framing that George Oliver gives, right? Directly from Cain. And again, you have to look at George Oliver as a solid source on, exactly. George Oliver is key figure here, Trevor. You have to look at George Oliver as a legitimate expression of Masonic thought and the understanding of Masonic legend, at the time, back in the 1820s, we're not talking about, the 1990s or the 2000s. We're talking about this early point of understanding that Joseph was working from in a time when many who came into the Latter-day Saint tradition took these histories as literal rather than legendary.
Yeah. And George Oliver wasn't the only one besides Joseph Smith who was making the literalness of the legends. I can't remember the names of a few others.
Salem Town, for example.
Yes. That's the
Salem Town being the one who said the day would come when pure Christianity and pure Masonry would both be restored, and that they would be joined hand in hand.
Yeah. So that seemed to be a big point with Dan, and I wish that he could just kind of open up a little bit more to the idea that the Book of Mormon might not be purely anti-Masonic, but that Joseph Smith might have had more of a nuanced view of Masonry early on. And that is definitely one of the big key points in our book, is that early on, Joseph Smith had a fascination with Masonry and was not really against it.
That was one of the key points in your book that made me basically, I didn't do this really, but made me call in sick and say, I can't make it in. And I could not put your lovely book down. I read all the way through it and I said, score these three. So just so you know, that was very interesting to me how you brought all that out. So.
It's very gratifying to have different people write to us or talk to us and say that this book has opened their eyes to, the idea that that Masonry was so prevalent in the day, and that Joseph Smith had experience with it, and that Joseph Smith might have, fashioned his religion with Masonry in mind, as well as other things. Mm-hmm. And that's another point, is that Dan, and also we're going to get to Jeff Bradshaw a little bit later, all seem to feel that because we are talking about Mormonism and Masonry, that we somehow don't feel that Joseph was influenced by Christianity or the Bible or other, like, Jacksonian America or anything else, and that's not true at all. We very much believe he was influenced by all these things.
One of the main things that I have learned in the wake of our book finally coming out is that people do not read prefaces. Because those who have criticized the book with what Cheryl talks about, that somehow we are saying that Freemasonry explains everything about Mormonism, clearly did not read or pay attention to the preface, because we're very explicit in the preface.
Yes, you are.
That we're talking about one influence among many.
Yeah, and by the way, our mutual beloved friend Clinton Bartholomew is here. So hi, Clinton. Glad to see you. So yeah, that's a good point. That the book just caught, of course, and I've known for decades that it was going to come out, and I knew the quality of the work you guys do, getting to know you through the years online. I mean, I love the internet, if for nothing else, to have met you three. But yeah, the book just kept me going. I was just, every page for me personally shows how ignorant I am, but every page was a revelation. I love that about your books. Thank you.
Thanks.
That'll be $39.43 inflation.
Thanks so much. I'm really excited that people are getting something out of this. So, is there anything else, Nick, that you want to say about spurious Masonry or meta-narrative or?
No, not at this point. I think that's, for the time we have, that's a good, discussion to that. I'm not going to spend, a full 2 hours on one point that shows up in a few pages. So,
sure.
So another thing that many people say is that Joseph Smith's motivation for joining the lodge was to gain personal capital or provide protection in some way. I have here, some have attempted to explain Joseph's involvement in Masonry as a 19th century equivalent of social and political networking. So we don't see this at all. But so many people have said this. And in the book, I think we explain quite well why we don't believe this. One, they promise when Masons join the lodge, they promise that they will not do this, that they will not use it for personal gain. But we know that some people do. So he could have done that. But when we drill down and we look at exactly what Joseph Smith does in Illinois, in Nauvoo, he does not curry favor. He does not. In fact, he does many things to alienate other people right from the beginning. And if he wanted to be politically, if he wanted to curry favor, he would not be behaving the way he did. And the lodge would not have done the things they did in order to gain.
He was still excommunicating fellow Mormons if they got in trouble and all. He never did stop doing that. And then he kept bringing in others, and if they wouldn't do the way he thought things should be going. So that to me, that's a pretty good point. That's interesting.
One thing for me, when Dan's response to this point was instructive to me about wording, because I wrote that particular passage, and for me, bringing up this idea that it was actually defamatory to Joseph to say that he joined the lodge for political and social capital, that was aimed specifically at Mormon apologists who have tried to distance Joseph from Freemasonry, saying, no, he wasn't buying into it. He just wanted to curry favor. What I was saying is the apologists, when they use that argument, are ironically actually in the same breath calling him a liar.
Interesting. Yeah.
So, so I understand, Dan's strength of feeling about that. And like I said, it's instructive to me to be a little more careful in the phraseology. Because
thank you for that. Because see, this is why I love having everybody on this show with your viewpoints. I would have never recognized that point at all. So thank you for bringing that up. I think that's interesting. That's clarifying. So very good.
We are really hoping that people who read this book, that this will kind of fall out of vogue now, to say that Joseph was using the lodge for political reasons. I hope that no one will ever say that again, because I feel like we make our case really well in the book for that.
My impression, and you're welcome to correct me if I'm wrong, because I probably could be or am most of the time, but Freemasonry to Joseph Smith was far more spiritually involving rather than say a political maneuver. I mean, he took, and I'm not saying this in a negative fashion, and you can correct my language if I'm doing this wrong, but he took the cream of Masonry and turned it into the butter of Mormonism. I mean, damn, is that good or what? That was right.
That's
like the turning idea there.
Yeah. He took the best of it and he utilized it in an honorable way. I felt I didn't feel threatened by this, whereas I understand there's a lot of apologists who are.
Yeah, and like Cheryl said, Joseph absolutely, did things to alienate the establishment. Jonathan Nye, for example, who had been the Grand Master of Vermont during the time the Smiths were in Vermont, came out to Illinois and Missouri and Iowa to assist Grand Lodges there in the formation of Grand Lodges. And he was the one who ended up being assigned to do the initial investigations of Nauvoo Lodge irregularities. And he saved their tail initially. He said, well, there's some problems, but there's nothing we can't handle without some good instruction. Well, later on, Joseph completely alienates Jonathan Nye, who's an extremely influential person to the point of being made honorary members of many Grand Lodges.
Oh, wow.
And when Jonathan Nye dies, and it's reported to Joseph, Joseph basically says, "Great, that's wonderful news," and goes on to accuse Jonathan Nye of adultery and trying to start an opposition lodge, and says this is what happens when you go against the buckler of Jehovah's belt, which was a code phrase at the time for the Danites. So Joseph definitely was not, focused on that. That doesn't mean that people are not complex, and that they don't have and that they don't have many motives. But to try to reduce his motivations to this idea of developing political and social currency is really not borne out by the evidence.
Yeah. So when I took notes, I wrote that Dan had said the easiest to demonstrate is for protection. And he went into the Guide to Historical Method by Robert Jones Schaefer. But I think the reason, and he also said that to Dan, it is obvious that Masons would provide protection. But this is because he's not looking at the sources that we looked at. Dan has studied Masonry and Mormonism, but not deeply as we have. And so I'm hoping that he will look at more deeply at the sources that we provide that show exactly what Joseph Smith was doing. Now, Dan did not go into the later part of the book. I think he only went through like chapter 3 in your podcasts. And the later part of the book is where you get when you drill down into exactly what was happening in Nauvoo.
Vogel's not savvy. He'll get there.
Yeah. And I'm sure he's always already read the book, but these things show that there was much more that went into it than just providing political protection. And of course, Dan is right that we can't always know that these historical figures' motivations. We can't. But when we write about them, we need to make some reasoned conclusions, and that's what we're doing here.
And what Cheryl's saying here is illustrative of a point we made before. This is the first time that experienced Freemasons and experienced Mormons have produced a work on the subject. The difficulty has always been either Masons who didn't understand Mormonism or Mormons who didn't understand Freemasonry beyond reading some exposés, trying to claim expertise.
Right, and several times Dan said, no one's ever said that before. And I thought, well, yeah, no one has ever said that before. It's true. And there's a reason why it's being said now. Yeah. And there's also a reason why this book took so long to come out.
Yeah, well, I remember talking to Joe and you, Nick, and you, Cheryl. I remember talking to you through the years, kind of inquiring about it and all that, and seeing some of the message boards and discussions you guys were on, and you just kept saying, we are working on it. It's happening. To stay calm. We have a lot of reading. Well, now that I look through your bibliography, wow. Yeah, you guys did a boatload of reading. No wonder it took 3 of you. No offense to you, Nick, because you started it. I know you're capable of producing quality books. That's true. But this book is better because the 3 of you pooled your sources. There's no question.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So I'm very grateful you guys bumped it together and said, okay, let's do this. We can. That was wonderful.
Amazing how it all came together. So let's go to the next part. So Dan talks a little bit about the lost word, and he said that he couldn't find anywhere in the book where we tell what the lost word was. And it would, the lost word is very ephemeral, but we don't have to prove that Joseph, what the lost word was. We just have to prove that Joseph felt like he had it, and that his followers felt like they had it, that he had restored the lost word. And we don't necessarily know what that lost word was, but this is this fabulous quote that Nick found talking about in the upper room of Joseph's red brick store, Joseph arrived and gave the proper entrance signal to Aishel Perry, who was acting as Tyler at the door. "Let him enter," responded George A. Smith, who had taken the place of worshipful master that day. Brother Joseph burst into the room, strode up and down the lodge, and according to the report of Dimmock B. Huntington, exclaimed, "Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah," said he. "I have done what King Solomon, King Hiram, and Hiram Abiff could not do. I have set up the kingdom no more to be thrown down forever, nor never to be given to another people." And Dan says that this was not a discovery of the lost word, that this was Joseph was saying, "I have set up the kingdom." But if you know what it was that King Solomon, King Hiram, and Hiram Abiff could not do, was put that word together. And that's the whole thing about it. And that's what you understand as a Mason. So here,
Right.
go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, as we've explained, there was in Masonic legend a covenant between these three that the master's word could only be given if all three were present.
Yeah.
And with the murder of Hiram Abiff, the fulfillment of that covenant became impossible.
Yep.
And that's what Joseph is referring to.
And this gives us shivers,
When I found it, my reaction to finding this account from Dimmock Huntington, you can imagine, was off the chart.
Yeah. This is an amazing quote. And it gives us so much insight into what Joseph felt that he had done. Now listen to this, though. This comes later in the book. Such a bold statement implicitly. Okay, let's go on. Let's see. Okay. On June 15th, 1844, William Clayton wrote in his journal, Joseph Smith spoke concerning key words. The grand key word was the first word Adam spoke and is a word of supplication. He found the word by the Urim and Thummim. It is that key word to which the heavens is open. So basically, William Clayton now is saying this is what Joseph Smith has done. So Dan is very concerned that we never in the book tell what the lost word was, but we do show that Joseph believed that he had restored that lost word, and his followers believed he had also restored it. So there it is, Dan.
And I would add that even if we felt that we had found what the lost word was, personally, as a Freemason who takes obligations seriously, I would not include that in the book. Because, within Freemasonry, of course, we're asked to keep a substitute word secret. But right. the injunction is that each individual Mason, and of course it's said figuratively, but it can be taken beyond, is to personally seek that word out through their own spiritual development. Personally, although I am no longer a Latter-day Saint, I don't go around divulging the key words of the Latter-day Saint endowment either, because I made an obligation not to do that. So even had we found
Tursky for the home run,
even had we found something that said, "Oh, here's what Joseph said the word was," personally, I would have argued against including it, and I think Joe would have too.
I suspect so.
And Cheryl would have been on board with that. Because of the covenants and obligations that any of us have entered into.
Yep.
Yeah, so at that point, Dan said something like, "Oh, well, it's their first book." So he was very despairing. He was very annoyed. So hopefully this is a response to that. And, it is our first book. And there are mistakes in this book, which we will get to. But this is not one of the mistakes. So this was very... I think this is a groundbreaking part of the book. So,
and Dan, what you said here, that's what I was wondering, but you could say you were holding it for obvious reasons. Yes, I think that would be fair. If we had found what specific word Joseph believed the lost word to be, then you're right. We could have then said, "Hey, we found it, but we're not going to say it." That'd be a little weird as a historical writing. But that certainly would have been an option. The fact is, we certainly did not find any record of what Joseph said the lost word was. So we'll leave that to future researchers, and we have no doubt that people will go on in the future to find things that we missed.
Sure. Well, I mean, I've heard from other fellow Masons as well as myself. We're already looking into a lot of stuff. Your book is going to spur an entire industry, and you guys are the ones that broke the strongest, most all-inclusive ground of any author up to date so far. Now, I say that as a compliment. You can't possibly be the last word.
Right.
Wow.
And we hope that
What
it
a
does spur
terrific
more.
inclusive word. Right. Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's how scholarship works. And yes, we hope that we got it right. But the reality was, Dan picked out a few little things here and there that he pointed out that we didn't quite get right. More power to him. Others are going to find new evidence.
Yeah.
That shows we completely misunderstood things or missed things. Others are going to find evidence they got things right. They're going to back us up further.
Mhm.
But that's the nature of scholarship. That's how it works.
Yeah. Yeah. Good stuff, you guys. Really good stuff.
Okay, so let's go to the next point. Okay, so Dan does not feel that treasure digging magic, any of these things were associated with Freemasonry. We do include many of these things in our book because we feel they have a connection with 19th century Masonry, which is different, of course, than contemporary Masonry. Did you want to say something about that, Nick?
Oh, I do.
Please.
I love the reaction. Dr. Litursky, he's going to be let loose.
This is his thing.
So again, going back to George Oliver, and I just recently acquired the first edition of his work.
Oh, I'm jealous.
Yes, I it's one of my little treasures now.
Yes.
But George Oliver, for example, in this context of Freemasonry, talks about Adam, legends of Adam taking a branch from the tree of life and being allowed to take that branch and take it with him out of the garden. Allegedly, according to George Oliver, in this Masonic history, mind you, this eventually ends up with that branch, the length of a staff, resting in the courtyard of Jethro, the Midian, and Moses just happens to see it, thinks, "Oh, that's an interesting looking stick," and picks it up. And Jethro is amazed and appalled in this very Arthurian kind of take, because nobody's ever been able to move this. And nobody would be able to, because this is the staff of Adam taken from the Garden of Eden.
Oh, interesting.
And this becomes the staff with which Moses leads the children of Israel, the same that is cast down by Aaron
with the snakes,
with serpents and such.
Yeah, interesting.
Now, I have a lot to say about how that story goes further, and that'll be for another work. But early on, you have George Oliver getting into these magical practices. And in fact, I know Dan criticized our suggestion that the wood scrape had Masonic connections. But again, it is these gifts of working with the rod, staff, the rod, the wand. These are synonymous terms in these centuries that we're talking about.
Yep.
And so all of these things come together. One of the challenges that people have had with the book is they want to look at individual pieces of evidence and say, "Oh, I'm not fully convinced that one individual piece is Masonic, or is a connection between Freemasonry and Mormonism." And you're right. If you take that one individual piece, it's not. It's when you put all the pieces together that we have gathered. Mm-hmm. And this is like any court case. Circumstantial evidence is evidence. And it's when you have the collection of that circumstantial evidence that you begin to paint a picture from which conclusions can be drawn. So
Yeah.
to say that treasure digging and magic had no connection with Freemasonry, honestly, is simply not an accurate reflection of 19th century and earlier Freemasonry or magic.
So about the Rodsman, he says, Dan says that's a stretch for me. None of the sources mention Masonry, but we have. They believed they were descendants of the ancient Jews. They believed in divining rods. They spoke about temples, digging for gold treasure, Masonic millennialism, St. John, restoration. All of these things, so many things have Masonic connections. So he doesn't see the Masonic connections, but hopefully others will read these in the book and see that Masonic connection that we've made between magic. And I wonder if we should go to, well, later on we'll go to the faculty of Abrac too. But go to the next slide. What do I have next?
Okay.
Yes.
Oh,
okay.
this one. Yes.
Okay, so Dan also says, well, Masons don't use the faculty of Abrac. I'm not going to explain that. Lucy Smith uses that phrase in a quote. And Dan says that we're reading too much into it because Masons didn't use the faculty of Abrac. Okay.
Hold it. Let me get this off. So there we go. That's better.
George Oliver includes this in his Antiquities of Masonry, specifically saying it is about pagan, pagan mysteries, but oddly enough is making a point of including it in a Masonic work. And of course, we also quote other authors who comment on the nature of that amulet or that charm. The fact is that it's all part of it. I was going to say too, and I'm sorry I didn't get to this when we were talking about magic, but also in George Oliver, he uses this symbol with regard to Freemasonry. Any ceremonial magician can tell you this is a magic circle for the purpose of conjuring spirits.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And is that an Enochian triangle in that circle, Nick, or is that me adding to it?
It is Enochian in nature, certainly. Not Enochian magic, which is another.
Right. Yeah. Right. I'm with you. No, good clarification. Yeah.
So the next slide, I think, talks about Enoch and yes. So Dan also says that the gold plate of Enoch, he does not see any correspondence between the gold plate of Enoch and the Book of Mormon. And he says, can't anybody go digging in a hill without them feeling like it's Masonic, or something like that. It was funny, but like there's so many correspondences between the gold plate of Enoch and Mormonism. So we have Enoch's brass pillar has a metal ball on top. The Book of Mormon tells of a brass ball, the Liahona. Enoch foresees a world-destroying flood. Joseph Smith receives a revelation of the Book of Moses, giving an account of Enoch foreseeing a world-destroying flood. Enoch predicts, I'm not going to go over all these. There's like 50 of them. There's 50 correspondences between the gold plate of Enoch, between Enoch and Joseph Smith in the Book of Mormon. So that, there's many obvious correspondences. In fact, we didn't even really go into all of them in the book because it seemed to us to be so obvious, and to other authors who have written about that as well. So I can't understand why Dan doesn't see any correspondence between parallelomania. So on one hand, he's going to say there's no correspondence, and on the other hand, he's going to say parallelomania. Okay.
Dan, I think it's great that you bring that up, because honestly, that was a concern of ours throughout the writing of the book. Because certainly, especially on the apologist end, this idea of parallels proving something in and of themselves has been abused very heavily. A certain CES staff member who wrote a review of our book is sort of known for that. So, we really felt that we were cautious in the drawing of these parallels.
Yeah.
And again, it's a matter of large amounts of circumstantial evidence coming together, not isolated picking and choosing.
Right. So another thing I see Dan doing is, and others do this as well, they say, oh, and when we get into the first vision, this will be important. Well, maybe I'll wait. Let's go to the next slide. Is it the first vision?
Sure. Yeah, we can do that.
No. Okay, I'll talk about it later in first vision. Dan, go ahead and go to the next slide.
You want to be there? Okay.
The Smith family. Because Dan spent a lot of time talking about the Smith family and Masonry. And it seems to me that he wanted to minimize the connection of the Smith family with Masonry. The parallels are weak, he says. Is he responding to this with weak and contrived? Okay. So there are several things that we brought up, I feel, that maybe are not the strongest arguments. We have Alvin Smith, who possessed a lap desk with Masonic implements inside of it, who passed it on to Hiram. And we speculate here, and I admit this is speculation, that we say, wonder if those Masonic implements were not actual Mason tools, but were Masonic implements for the craft of Freemasonry. So we just wonder that in the book. And when Dan spoke about it, he went on and on about this lap desk. Oh, you can't fit the Book of Mormon in the lap desk. And he went on into other people's arguments about the lap desk, which had nothing to do with what we were arguing. So he made it sound like in the podcast, he made it sound like we were saying things that we weren't. So there are times when we do speculate. We wonder if this might have been something or other. And I think that we're not trying to make any point. We just are wondering about possibilities. We wonder if Alvin Smith was a Mason. That's all. So go to the next slide.
Ah, seagulls. The eagles of the sea.
The best way to book your stay in the USA. Booking.com,
Yeah.
Stop stuffing sopping wet bags of ice into your cooler. I've got a brand new fridge on wheels that keeps your food.
So Hiram Smith was definitely a Mason. And Dan talks about the spelling of Hiram's name. This is a big point for Dan. We did not make a big issue out of this. My personal belief, I don't know if Nick and Joe really believe this like I do, but I am strongly convinced that in the 19th century, spelling was very fluid and people didn't care how their names were spelled. They really did not. In census records, you will see it spelled differently every 10 years, and I feel like Hiram didn't care how his name was spelled. Dan thinks that he changed the writing of his signature from Hiram to Hyrum after the Morgan affair, and that was meaningful. So here we have signatures of Hiram after 1830, I guess after 1830, where he spells it Hyrum. But if you look on the left there, that little book is Hiram Smith's book. Up on the top, that's where he signed it. And then later on, another person took possession of that book and then wrote that this was the book of Hiram, Hiram Smith. Now he writes it right underneath where it says Hiram and so he can read. I feel like honestly, it didn't make a difference to him what the spelling was.
And when we talk about this huge influx of people in Vermont naming their sons Hiram around the time of the creation of the Grand Lodge of Vermont, those spellings were all over the map as well. They were basically every phonetic version of Hiram that you could come up with. And that did not mean that they were different names. That did not mean that somebody spelled their child's name with a different vowel in order to distance it from Freemasonry.
Yeah.
It was just a variety of spellings.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, but what it does show is go ahead to the next one. Because I think here's the testimony of the 8 witnesses to the Book of Mormon, and you see Hiram Smith with the HY. So, but I think that what it does show is that there was an interest on Joseph Smith Sr.'s part in Masonry as early as the birth of Hiram Smith, for him to be naming his son Hiram. And that argument is one of Nick's, and it's very good. It's in the book talking about the beginnings of the use of that word, that name Hiram, when the lodge entered the area in Vermont. So, okay, go to the next one. So, okay.
Here's the important signature of Hiram, isn't it?
Well, this isn't a signature, but this is the lodge minutes in Nauvoo. So now, Dan talked quite at length about, we don't really know if Hiram was the Hiram that was in Mount Moriah Lodge. Well, it's pretty certain that that was the Hiram, because he later in Nauvoo Lodge declares his membership. And here's the minutes. The following members then reported themselves to hail from the lodges appended to their names, respectively, to wit, George Miller, Widow's Son Lodge, and then Hiram Smith, Mount Moriah, number 112, New York. So he declares that that was the lodge he was in. Now, Dan says he offered it up as possible evidence of a change of attitude. So Dan said in your podcast that he felt that maybe Hiram did join Mount Moriah Lodge, and then he later left Freemasonry, and then in Nauvoo he came back. Now, there's no evidence for this.
And Dan, Dan in the podcast basically tried to say that we could not reliably say that Hiram Smith was the Hiram in Mount Moriah Lodge. And what, given what we have in the Nauvoo Lodge records, that would involve a conspiracy in which Hiram Smith somehow knew that there had been a Hiram Smith in Mount Moriah Lodge at some point. It would be to show up on the records and now was going to lie and say, well, I'm that Hiram. I can't quite imagine what the point of that would be, especially when you look at the fact that Hiram right away was taking on important ritual roles in the lodge, which showed the fact that he was an experienced Freemason.
Yeah.
Interesting.
We're pretty sure about Hiram's membership in the lodge. Now, Joseph Smith Sr., if you go to the next slide, we are not sure if Joseph Smith Sr. was a Freemason before his death. And we talk about this in the book, and we explore different things. We explore whether Joseph Smith Sr. was the person in Vermont who petitioned a lodge in Vermont and was turned down. We never say that was Joseph Smith Sr., our Mormon Joseph Smith Sr. We just explore, different ideas. And we also explore whether he was the Joseph Smith that joined Canandaigua Lodge. And so let's see. Here's just a paragraph from the book talking about the wording that we use, talking about he could have become a Mason in Vermont. So go to the next one. So we say a search of Mount. Okay, this was what Dan took issue with, this particular sentence. A search of Mount Moriah's lodge records has not revealed the induction of a Joseph Smith, but he does appear on the records of Ontario Lodge number 23. So Dan's saying that this wording is, we are definitely saying that this Joseph Smith is our Joseph Smith Sr. because I say he does appear, but really this is, I'm still speaking of a Joseph Smith here. I am not coming down and saying this is our Joseph Smith. So
if you pressed me, I would still say I think it was, but I don't think it's an absolute proven, nor do I think that, as Dan just said, that there's no evidence.
No evidence. Right. So Dan says that he could have been, but there's no evidence of it. So what we're exploring in the book is We are not saying outright that he was a Freemason, but we are exploring what evidence could there be that shows that Joseph Smith Sr. could have been a Mason, and you can decide for yourself. Now, all of us three authors believe that Joseph Smith Sr. was a Mason in Canandaigua. But we tell you right in our book, in the pages of our book, why we believe that, and you can make up your own mind. So,
Sure.
so if Dan doesn't want to agree, that's fine, and that's okay. So, but what I worried about was that he said that we definitely say in the book, and now I've heard other people say this too, that we as authors show that Joseph Smith Sr. was a Mason, but we don't do that. We just bring up the possibility. So
Okay, fair enough.
yeah, it's a very good possibility. Okay, so go to the next one.
There he is.
There
Now
he is.
everybody in chat knows what Dan Vogel looks like. There he is. We've
Okay,
never
so on
seen
my Facebook page, I talked about you using that sexy pose of me, and somebody said that Dan should see if he could rebut with a sexy pose of his own. So here he is. So you can compare. And
good return.
Dan, he does look pretty good there.
He does. He looks
and this
good.
is also an early picture of him, like that other one was an early picture of me too. Dan has argued that this Joseph Smith was unlikely to be the father of the Mormon prophet. He points out, and this is actually, this is from our book. We have this in our book. This is a quote from our book. Dan Vogel has argued that this Joseph Smith was unlikely to be the father of the Mormon prophet. He points out that the Ontario Lodge record lists the initiative, and we tell the reasons why. So we I think give fair airplay to the other side of the issue. Dan says the first sentence is too strong. Okay, can never win. But we do show both sides of the argument, and we show Dan's side of the issue. So
well, hey, actually, my impression here, really seriously, is we are all looking for the same thing, and more or less all on the same side, trying to figure out just what is going on. And again, I am looking very forward if he will come on. I'm friends with Jeff Bradshaw, and I have broached the subject. I invited him to watch this meeting tonight, this show, and hopefully I can get him to come on because I personally would really enjoy his approach to all of this.
Yeah.
And so this,
we'll get to it. We're gonna get to Jeff. But we do want to thank Dan for all of his historical research. We quote him quite frequently. We use his books a lot in writing our book. We used his historical documents series, and he's done great work. Absolutely. So let's go on. So this is where, and I didn't mean to block these out. I meant to highlight them. So oops. But this is a point that Dan has brought up that was a typo in our book, where it says Joseph Smith. The first one is our Joseph Smith Sr. Location Farmington. Distance from Ontario Lodge, we said 8 miles. And Mount Moriah Lodge, we said it was number, where was that? 123. Now, that is a typo. It was lodge number 112. And we do have that elsewhere in the book when we talk about Mount Moriah Lodge. We have 112. But here, for some reason, it was a typo 123.
Thank you. We get to correct that in the paperback.
Yeah. We will correct that. Yes. So thank you. And also he talks about the 8 miles, and I think he makes great points when he talks about the 8 miles. We did take the 8 miles from Farmington. What was that? Is it Village? Farmington Village. Instead of the township, or the other way around. And so Dan showed that it was a few miles more. I think he said 13 miles rather than 8. And his point is very well taken there. So, yes.
Very good. Bravo. I love
Yeah.
it when scholars can agree and disagree and do it amiably.
So,
This is
yeah.
rocking.
I
Yeah.
still feel like we make good points there, but Joseph Smith was not the closest Joseph Smith to the Canandaigua Lodge. So, okay, from Ontario Lodge. Okay, let's go on. Did William Morgan know Joseph Smith?
Ooh.
So,
Do-do-do-do-do-do-do.
here's another point we just are wondering, and we have some good evidence that shows that perhaps they did. There's a quote that says, John Whitney reported in later years that Morgan had been a halfway convert of Joe Smith the Mormon. And then we have from the Masonic Intelligencer, in the spring of 1826, Morgan was absent, and the general impression among his acquaintance was that he had absconded, at least he had gone to parts unknown. During Morgan's absence, his wife had her second child and claimed assistance, blah, blah, blah. During this period, it since appears that Morgan was in Ontario County writing his book. So he was placed so that he could have known Joseph Smith. And there was at least one quotation that says that he was a halfway convert of Joe Smith. Now, Dan says that this is the only place anyone's ever said this. So he doesn't.
Well, we know he knew Morgan's widow.
Yes.
Well, later.
Just saying.
Later.
Yeah.
So it's just very interesting. And we do in our book bring out things that are very interesting to us. You know, it might be interesting to know that they may have had a contact with each other. It may be interesting to why did he later have a close relationship with Lucinda, you know, those kind of things. So, okay, let's go on.
Okay. Next one.
Okay.
Oh, that's a beautiful slide. I love that. I really do. I love that. That's awesome.
Thank you.
You've got
So,
good taste in slides.
Here's our parallelomania, which Dan objects to. He does not find this compelling that the first vision accounts mirror the Masonic rite of illumination. He does not feel that there are, he said there aren't, I think he said that the similarities are not compelling to him. Now, he goes through several of these and talks about how they're weak. And the thing about this is, and this happens other places in the book as well, is you might pick out one of these similarities and show how it could be weak. And I have an example of, say I tell you my name is Chelsea. Well, there's many, many people whose names are Chelsea in this country. And then I tell you that my mother's name is Hillary and my father's name is Bill. Well, we could find many people who have those parents' names. And then, oh, my parents were lawyers. And, oh, I lived in Washington, D.C. for a time. And I go on and on and on. And I tell you many little things. Now, I never have to come out and tell you my father was the president of the United States for you to know that I'm Chelsea Clinton. If I tell you 20 different things about myself, that perhaps you can pick out one or two and say, oh, that's weak, you know. But when you put them all together, this makes a very strong case. And when you put the first vision accounts, all their Masonic similarities together, you can see that there's a very strong case that Masonry influenced the story of the first vision. And maybe it was later.
Can also mean the telling of the story, how
Right.
it is framed, how it is worded. This becomes very prominent in the golden plates, for example, where the descriptions are obviously influenced by Freemasonry.
He's still not convinced, but that's okay.
So contrived, he says. Okay, so I mean, this may also have been told later, like you said, Nick. It may be a later telling of a remembered experience. But when you have so many that fit together like this, then that is very strong evidence. And
Do you
this
want me to
happens
keep
in
it
other
on the
places.
slide, or do you want?
Yeah, keep it on the slide.
Oh, for Pete's sake. It was the prettiest slide, too. Okay, here we go. Okay. There we go.
So, I mean, the fact that the scripture he used, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God. Ask, seek, and knock. This is an important scripture to Freemasonry. Well, yeah. I mean, that might be weak because it's also been found in the Bible, and so that might be weak on its own. On its own. But if you take all the rest of the things that we go through in the chapter, I think it'll convince you. So maybe not.
Hey, an idea just popped into my head. I'll share it with you real quick. It's perhaps as an analogy. You have one little string, and by itself it's weak.
Right.
You take 2 strings and twist them, it's okay. You take 32 strings and twist them, you've got a rope that'll pull a ship.
And by the way, none of this discounts the fact that there were multiple accounts at that time of visions of God and Jesus, or any of these other cultural things. Again, nowhere are we saying that only Masonry influences these things. We are saying that Freemasonry was an influence.
Okay, yeah, that's an important point. Thank you.
Yeah, because Jeff Bradshaw does that too. Dan says, well, why didn't you use so-and-so, and so-and-so wrote about this, and why didn't you? And Jeff said the same thing. Why didn't you use this apologist, that apologist who also wrote about, because those aren't the, that's not what we were focused on. We're focused on Masonry and Mormonism. We're not focused on Christianity and Mormonism, so.
Or ancient Near Eastern ritual and Mormonism.
That's
hey, that's where Jeff Bradshaw is going to come into play then. And we want to save some time to talk about Jeff, and we are closing in. Let me put this back up and you can.
Okay, so keep going then.
Oh, did you get through all this that you wanted?
They can be done.
Okay, let's go to this next one.
Okay, let's just skip over that one. Go to the next one.
Okay.
Oh, that's the last one. Right.
You want to go back to that last one?
No. Just so
Okay.
Dan says we're reading too much into things. And that's where my Chelsea Clinton thing comes in. I feel like if you just look at one thing that we're doing, you may think that we're reading too much into it. But when we have so many different things that are based on Masonry, then it really makes a big difference. And that's what's so illuminating about the book, is that you see all these different things put together in one place.
And this, of course, is Dan's pervasive complaint, and even in the comments that are showing at the bottom this evening, he's saying contrived or reaching too hard. What's really interesting is he's saying that about everything in the book. Now, I'll admit I eventually gave up watching the diatribes, but what I noticed, that the first 4 hours ranted about the first 33 pages of the book, and only one semi-positive note was made that something he found interesting that we discovered. Honestly, if you can go on for 8 hours about a book and find nothing positive about it, then your reaction may not be really about the book. And that comes in, it's sort of interesting because, Dan mentioned that he'd read a couple books by Jung decades ago, and that apparently made him an expert on Jung. But what apparently he doesn't know about Jung is Jung's discovery of psychological complexes, and the kind of overwrought reactions that we can sometimes have originate from those psychological complexes, and sometimes can completely take us over in terms of our behavior. The reaction that Dan has had, where he cannot seem to find anything positive, is not a scholarly reaction. It is and it's an emotional reaction.
Well, unless the book really sucks.
Right, but if Dan wants to clarify that he genuinely, from a scholarly standpoint, believes that there is nothing useful in this book, then, perhaps he should consider that, there's more going on for him than just a scholarly reaction here.
Oh, here's a good question. Can we answer this and then we'll jump on to Jeff Bradshaw? What does method infinite mean? Why did you call your book Method Infinite? That's a great question.
It is. Eliza R. Snow was quoted in later years saying there is method in Mormonism, method infinite. Mormonism is Masonic. And we found that just a juicy, wonderful quote. And
you can't leave that one out. No kidding, man. Yeah. Put it right on the cover. Yeah.
So that's where that comes from.
Okay, so early on the show, on the start, we had this fine gentleman, and I'm not doing this to mock Jeff. It's a fun meme that went on the message boards, and we were kind of laughing about how he's just conveniently coming up with his own book about the same time you guys. He was trying to get a book out at the same time, and now he's done some reviews, and so he does have a new review on Interpreter. That is Dan Peterson's scholarly work, online scholarly work. Basically, Peterson can't stand being away from farms. So Interpreter, my impression of it is it's Farms Junior. And I don't mean that disparagingly either. He just doesn't have the infrastructure now that he used to as the Farms editor. But so there's a controversy here, and I want to be crystal clear. I'm of the impression that Jeff Bradshaw has asked, and you guys are friends. I mean, you're all basically working together more or less. And he knew about your book coming out, and you knew about him wanting to study Freemasonry as an apologist. Did he actually ask both of you for a copy of the book so that he could write a review and write his own book to respond to your book?
So the reality is, a few months before the book came out, he contacted Lloyd Erickson, the managing editor of Cofer Books.
Oh,
and
Lloyd.
Asked for an advanced reader's copy before we even had the ARCs printed, so that he could have a review ready to issue at the time the book was published.
Oh, okay.
I actually objected at the time.
You hard nose.
Simply because I'm familiar with Dan Peterson and his brand of apologetics, and I was not interested in the kind of ad hominem attacks that are typical there.
Right.
Jeff assured Lloyd that he would not go into the ad hominem, and even said that he would write the review himself to make sure that didn't happen. So over our objections, or I should say at least my objections, I shouldn't speak for Cheryl there, Lloyd gave him a full PDF of the book before we even had actual printed ARCs. The entire representation at the time was so that he could have a review written to come out at the same time as the book.
Okay.
So in no way were we informed at that stage that he was preparing a book of his own.
Oh.
No, not whatsoever.
I think the light bulb went on.
Right. So we feel that he obtained the advanced reading copy under false pretenses, because what happened was later on, about May, then he let us know, oh, I'm going to take, and he had written a long article in the Interpreter in, I believe, was it 2018? About 15?
Mm-hmm.
About ancient correspondences in Masonry in the book, and Freemasonry and Mormonism. And so he said, oh, now I've decided that I'm going to expand this article into a book. Now, still, this was May, we still did not realize that he was going to use our book, and so use that book in writing his book, and we did not realize he was going to try to get this book out at the same time that our book was going to come out. Right. He also did not ask us for permission to quote from the book, because this is an advanced reading copy. We don't want anyone, we'd love for people to quote from the book later on when they're responding to it. but we would like for our book to come out first before
Sure.
anyone starts quoting from it.
And just so you know, this is typical in the publishing industry to actually have an embargo on reviews until at least the same week as the book is coming out.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what he did was then he cornered me at Mormon History Association. We had lunch together, and he asked me many questions about Masonry, which I was free to answer with him. And he asked about the book. He tried to refine his thinking, which he was going to put out in his book, so that, you know, he wanted to catch any little mistakes that he would get. And I thought that this book, he gave the impression to me that this book was far in the future, that he was going to come out with the review, and then he was going to work on a book in the future. And was that your impression too as well, Nick?
Yes.
So
Well,
he
that's-
did
he knows
correspond
that-
with both of us.
Too. Yeah.
Yeah. He later began to correspond with us and ask us to look over drafts. Allegedly saying that he wanted to be sure he was not misrepresenting our views.
Right.
And in fact, we helped him avoid some really embarrassing mistakes in terms of what he was saying about history and such. On a few occasions, he did ask if he could quote from our discussions, and we did in some cases give him permission for that.
Well,
but,
Nick did. I didn't want him quoting me.
Okay.
But Nick did. But he did not ask to quote from the book. And he did end up quoting quite liberally from the book.
Yeah, that's
and then, and then shortly before our release date, he unveiled the fact that his book was actually coming out in the same week as a print on demand. And you know, this book is not a rapid.
Hey, Nick's starting to act like me. Woohoo!
Sorry. You know, see, came out with this book. It is cheaply produced, print on demand. You know, lots of pretty pictures. It looks really thick, but it's mostly because there's lots of pretty pictures in it for filler, so it looks authoritative and big on the shelf.
Right. Well,
but yes, it came out. In the meantime, the review we kept asking him about, because he also said that he would share the review with us before he issued it. Again, to make sure he was not misrepresenting our views. So we kept asking, where's the review? Where's the review? And we got everything short of my dog ate my homework.
Yeah.
Really? Yeah. Yeah.
And then
It looks like Quentin Bartholomew also had.
Yeah, that looks. Yeah, that's you know, and it became quite obvious to us that he was using the advanced review copy to write his book, and then later, when he was pushed on it, he did come out with a quite extensive review. But that was secondary to his main purpose for getting the advanced review copy, was to write his own book, which is a rebuttal. It is not, you know, it is a rebuttal to Method Infinite, which is fine because, you know, that's what we would expect.
I'll be interested in reading that.
I wouldn't even call it a rebuttal. I would call it a redirection.
Oh, okay.
Because the book does not actually refute Method Infinite. In fact, it acknowledges the depths of our historical research. But instead, it says, but look over here instead. Look that way.
Oh, and don't tell me, let me guess, to the ancient world.
Exactly. So that is the focus. And when his review finally came out, mind you, the review did not come out until all this began to go public.
Right.
And Dan Peterson saw it go public. And
On
everybody was
Thanksgiving
beginning
Day,
to pile on saying something smells funny.
Yeah.
Finally, we got a draft of the review, and the review itself says some very positive things about the book. But then, like Cheryl said earlier, gosh, why didn't you agree with these other apologists that I'm citing? And then a whole third of the review is, again, but look over here. And it's his own, you know, it's promoting his own interest in the ancient world, which is very rehashed nibbly. I mean, it's that's just what it is.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, he's the grandfather of the the farm's apologetics, and they just can't seem to leave him alone.
Right.
So I get that. I get that. It's okay.
All that said, to his credit, he kept his word in staying away from ad hominems.
Uh-huh.
You know, we did not get a shoot the messenger, which is typical of these sort of review sources.
Well, I'm glad. That's good.
And you know, and we did have cordial exchanges. But in the end, we honestly felt like we had been very deceived.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. Doggone it. Yeah, but I mean, it happens. So, well, okay, now here's the good news then. I'm going to try to get him on my show so that we can talk about the contents of his book. I have not seen it. I partially got through the review that was posted on Thanksgiving Day on the Interpreter by Peterson. But my here's the thing that Joe taught me. Well, you did. All three of you have taught me this. I keep going back to Joe because he's the one I talk to the most on the phone. I'm not trying to slight either one of you, but the idea here is that it is senseless. There is no reason to go 2,000 years ago,
right,
when it's right in Joseph Smith's own backyard for his entire life.
Yeah.
So even if he does bring up Egyptian parallels like Nibley and Babylonian like Gee, and how about the Mesopotamian? Can we get over? Who gives a flip? It's in Joseph Smith's backyard in his own family.
Right. And ironically, many of the apologists would love to respond to things like the George Oliver references by saying, well, you have no proof he ever read George Oliver.
Oh, yes, we do.
We do, because, you know, he quoted it. But, you know, that's the line.
Right.
And yet, you know, they want to say there's these ancient parallels, which somehow are contorted into proof of revelation. And it's unfortunate.
Right. So that's what I was talking when we talked at MHA. I was trying to dig down and say, why are you interested in the ancient parallels? What meaning does this have for you? And I think, are you trying to say that Joseph could not have known about these things, and yet since we see him anciently, that there's the same source of revelation to the ancients and then to Joseph Smith? Is that what you're trying to say? And he says, well, I don't want to make it that, you know, he doesn't want to actually come out and say that, because later on we could maybe find out that no, it came from something more modern. And so I don't want to put his neck in the noose, you know, but to me, it doesn't, that's not an interest to me. It's just not interesting to look back. That doesn't prove to me revelation. You know, that's not, and that's, I mean, that's the whole emphasis on ancient correspondences, is because they want to prove that Joseph Smith got these things from revelation and not from his surroundings.
Yeah. And well, and then the other thing that's so interesting to me, because I'm coming from a Mormon apologist, former Mormon apologist like you guys, is this I'm going to try to word this fair, but real, this skittish, this fear, maybe this skittishness about acknowledging anything in Joseph Smith's environment. And so they want it in a vacuum, so to speak, so that he gets it purely from revelation, so that it's totally unique. That don't hunt.
Yes, and so the thing, Carrie, is too, is that he, in his book, he wants to say in his book, I'm not afraid of looking at the Masonic correspondences. He's trying to say that, and yet he can't get there. He is not getting there at all, because when he does say, well, this may have been affected by Masonry, he'll put a huge but in front of it, and you know, it's just
right.
He wants to
Sounds like a gun.
He wants to minimize those correspondences.
Yeah. One thing, you know, I mean, look at the title here, and you see what's really at the core of this.
Oh, there you go. Right.
What's interesting is, you know, to me, and now granted, I am no longer a believing Latter-day Saint, certainly, but our book deals very little with the temple ordinances, and certainly does not preclude the idea of inspiration. We talk about an influence on early Mormonism.
Yeah.
And honestly, to me, the idea of the idea that the temple ordinances were taken from Freemasonry is almost trivial, because it's just one little iceberg tip out of a much bigger story of Masonic influence in early Mormonism.
Mhm.
So what the apologists are doing here through Jeff's work is really honing in on the one thing that frightens them, because they are afraid, and were afraid from, before they even got the manuscript, that we were going to attack the Latter-day Saint temple experience.
Oh, yeah.
And everything that's being done here is aimed at that, not at the rest.
And I didn't see an attack on the Mormon temple stuff at all in your guys' book. And I knew beforehand that wasn't what your focus was going to be anyway. It's not anti-Mormon, it's pro-truth is how I like to put it now when people say, well, you're just anti-Mormon. I said, no. Here's what is so remarkable, you guys. Seriously, everyone around Joseph Smith, though, were Freemasons, were becoming Freemasons, and bragging about how it helped them understand the endowment. That's been lost in today's Mormonism, hasn't it?
And yes, and then we really, that's what we wanted to bring out. Why? And what was Joseph Smith all about? What was he doing? That's what we were trying to dig out.
Yeah, because there was it wasn't a contest. Oh, well, it's either Masonry or Joseph Smith's revelation. It was Masonry that helped give Joseph Smith his revelation.
And interestingly, the book points out is that even after we have the Nauvoo Temple and we have people going through the Nauvoo Temple after Joseph Smith's death and getting their endowments, even after that, they're still becoming Masons. In some cases, we found they would get their endowment and then become a Mason. So that was very interesting. And then we look at other break-off sects from Mormonism where they also are finding Freemasonry important. And
I thought that was quite interesting. Toward the end of the book, the back of the book, the break-off sects were still doing the Freemasonry and endowments. Yeah, that was fun. That I'd never seen that in any other discussions on Masonry. So, look, the good news is you guys have seriously broken some, I'm not going to say new ground. I'm going to say what you did is you've broken extended ground, far, far out, much greater width and in depth. And for that, sincerely, Mormonism and all the rest of us are going to be eternally in your debts for the magnificent work you do. Now, I understand that the book it's essential, and it's a big book. Thank you, because I love big books that put a lot. It was actually cut in half by the editor, so there's some future materials coming out from you guys, right, on this subject. Still,
probably, but Nick is actually going to break more new ground. So I'm really excited about where he's going with his directions. So
yeah, we've talked a little bit about it, and we'll talk some more about it. Yeah, just remember, Dr. Latursky, you are earmarked for this show when you produce more stuff. No, you guys, I have just loved this immensely. Thank you so very much for your time. I know it's precious to you and important, and thank you for sharing your knowledge and your information and your understanding and your reviews. I will have Dan Vogel on again in January, which will give you two a chance, if you would like, to come back on my show. I would love to have you on my show again. So we're gonna close it out for now, you guys in the audience. Thank you for being such a great audience. I appreciate all your support and love, and we will be back next Sunday. I'm going to have Barry Richens on, and we are going to talk about Book of Mormon and archaeology in both places. Mesoamerica, which he has been to and knows some of the natives and talked to them, and the Heartland, whom he also knows people, archaeologists, and some of the issues with that. So don't miss next week. And in the meantime, remember, be good, do well, have fun, stay friends, sleep well, don't overeat like I do, and so on and so forth. And we will catch you guys on the next Backyard Professor live show.
Bye, everyone.
Great. Thanks, Gary. Thank you, everybody.
Look, you've had a good career. I don't think you're
And hello? Okay, and so let me find one more video, if you give me a second. Another video to show. This should be showing up here.
Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. Many people know that there are similarities between Masonic ceremonies and LDS temple ceremonies. What are the similarities? What are the differences? We'll talk more about these in our next conversation with historian Cheryl Bruno. You won't want to miss this episode. Check it out. Hey, I just wanted to mention one other thing. Beyond the Blocks is an awesome podcast, and it seeks to center the narratives of the marginalized in conversations on Mormonism. A Black lifelong member and queer theologian, Brother Jones and Brother Knox seek to fill the gaps between Mormon theology and Mormon culture that find all kinds of identities may claim a seat at the table of Christ. So check out Beyond the Block. It's a great podcast. Now back to our conversation. What else can you tell us as far as these similarities without, breaking anything that we're not supposed to talk about?
Well, I like to talk about the 5 points of fellowship because this is no longer a part of the temple ceremony. But it used to be part of the temple ceremony when I first went through, and it is a Masonic ritual. And so one thing I noticed when I started learning about Freemasonry is it gave meaning to that symbol, which I never understood as a Mormon. And Masons they're able to tell you what each symbol means. Each of the 5 points has a specific meaning to the Masons. And when I learned those meanings, it made my Mormonism suddenly come alive for me. So
and then they took it away.
Yeah, darn. And I find that in a lot of different things in the temple is that if you understand Freemasonry, it's not exactly borrowed from Freemasonry, but Freemasonry gives it a meaning that is broader and that helps you understand why it's there a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I know, since we mentioned that, I know, in fact, I just had a conversation with somebody, and he says, do you know why they made these changes in 1990? I know there was some big differences there. And it sounds like there are different beliefs in that. My response was, well, it was due to the God makers. And that the church has tried to kind of sever some of these Masonic elements to make it more different. Is that a fair characterization?
Well, I have a little different view, and I am a believing Mormon, so that's kind of where I'm coming from. But I feel that there are changes that they make in the temple ceremony make them more meaningful for people today. A lot of the symbols, symbolism is really important to me, and sometimes I think it's a real shame that some of those symbols are lost. But when it no longer means the same thing to people that are going through the temple, it needs to be removed. And one of these is women veiling their faces. That used to have a very different meaning to women than it does today. And today it's very oppressive. And so it needs to be taken out of the ceremony because it's seen by women now as being oppressive, and that's not what the symbol was meant to convey. So it's appropriate to change things so that the ritual now conveys something that it's meant to convey. Because society has changed, and because people change, we need to also keep up with that in our...
Well, and that's interesting that you mentioned that, because I know, in fact, tell me if this is a true statement, because I believe in Joseph Smith's day that in order to be a Mason, you had to be a man. You could not be a woman. Mm-hmm. And so I've heard that when Joseph introduced the endowment ceremony and he allowed women to participate, that made a lot of Masons angry because women weren't supposed to be part of this. Is that true?
No, and I wonder where that comes from, because I've tried to track down where that idea is coming from. And there is absolutely, first of all, there were women Masons in Joseph Smith's time.
Oh, really?
There were. And we believe that some of the women in Nauvoo actually were part of maybe the heroines of Jericho. There's a little bit of evidence there, which will be in my book. But I don't think it had a lot to do with anything. But the fact that Joseph was... the Grand Lodge of Illinois had a lot of different problems with things that Joseph Smith was doing, or that Masons were doing in Nauvoo. And they come out with it quite clearly. You know, we're having a problem with this, we're having a problem with that. And never was ever said contemporaneously that they had a problem with women being brought into ritual. That was never said. It was simply not a problem for other Masons. And so I don't know when this idea started that Masons were upset that.
Well, that's interesting.
I don't know when that started, but I'd like to track that down, because I think it's quite recently, that it's not, within the last 50 years or something, but it's a more recent idea.
Well, and another thing that I wanted to ask you about was, I know Michael Homer has written the book, Joseph's Temples. Right. I need to get Michael on. He's agreed, and I just haven't gotten to him. But I know in his book he has said that he thinks that the ban on Black church members was also due to Masonic influences.
Yes, I really enjoyed his chapter in his book where he writes about that. It's kind of breaking new ground. I don't have exactly the same ideas that he does, and you'll have to compare our two books to see the differences, because it's quite involved. But I think that, I admire his argument. I just don't see it the same way. I don't think that the influence, the Black lodges didn't come into play in the United States until much later, after Joseph Smith died. So I don't think it had so much of an influence in.
So you would reject that idea?
Ban. No, I think that started with Brigham Young, and I don't think it had anything to do with Masonry.
Oh, that's interesting.
So.
I believe that Walker Lewis, who was a Mason in Massachusetts.
Yes, he actually was a Grand Master.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that was did they have a special Black Lodge in Massachusetts?
Yes.
And so he had helped start that as well.
Yes. And some people believe that might have been some of the tension he had with Brigham Young when he later went to Utah.
Oh, really? Can you tell us more about that?
No, I don't know much about it.
Oh, okay. That's too bad. All right. Can you talk a little bit more? It seems like in the early days of the church, Mormon leaders weren't, they didn't hide the Masonic temple ceremony connections. Can you talk us a little bit more about that?
No, I think they're really proud of being Masons. And the interesting thing to me is that after Joseph Smith died, they continued to make Masons at even faster a pace than when he was alive. So even though they now had the temple ceremony, the Nauvoo temple was up and running, they still continued to make Masons. And it wasn't even just a preparatory thing for the temple ceremony, because several men that we know of had their temple endowments and then were made Masons after that. So we end up with about 1,300 Masons in the Nauvoo Lodge alone, and several other, maybe 7 other Mormon lodges in the area. So who knows how many Mormon men were Masons? Maybe as many as 1 in 4 Mormon men were Masons by the time they started going over to Utah.
Okay. And so it seems like I've heard that in Utah especially, there was a little bit of animosity between Masons and Mormons.
Yes.
Why?
Brigham Young was very upset at the martyrdom. He believed that Joseph Smith had been murdered by Masons or with Masonic influence.
Well, and I understand Joseph Smith did set up a Masonic call of distress.
Well, whether he did or not is kind of up for grabs. However, the Mormons of the period believed that that's what he had been doing.
Oh, so it's not
So
clear?
we do have evidence. Well, the evidence we have is that several Mormons believed that's what he was doing. So, you know, I don't think he came out with the entire Masonic call of distress, but he did do enough of it so that it was recognizable.
Do you think that he recognized Masons in the mob and was trying to save himself?
There are several different, and I'm not really sure what his motivation was for giving. I believe he was giving the Masonic call of distress, but there's several reasons he could have been doing that. There could have been Masons in the mob that he thought might help him, or he could have known that they weren't going to help him because they were very against, the Masons in the mob would have been very against Mormon Masonry. So maybe he was just reminding them what they were doing was not Masonically correct. Or maybe he was just calling out to God with a Masonic call, because Masons believed that that was an effective, even if there was no mortal ear to hear that call, that God would hear that. So there's several reasons why he could have done that.
So would it be, can Masonry be considered a religion then?
Joe, my husband, used to say over and over again, Masonry is not a religion. They don't want to be a religion. But to me, they seem very religious in what they do. Very symbolic and very esoteric, and I believe very religious. They do believe in God and a higher being, and they take pains not to join with any particular religious organization, but they do have a strong connection with God. And the whole purpose behind being a Mason is to forge a connection with the divine being.
Because I've heard you could be a Jew, you could be a Christian, you could be a Muslim, a Hindu. It doesn't, your religion doesn't matter. But whatever religion you are, you should believe in a higher being.
Right.
Could you be an atheist and be a Mason?
No.
You cannot. You have to believe in God.
Yes.
Okay. But whatever your religion is, the idea is to make you a better Jew, Christian, Mormon, whatever.
Yes.
Is that fair?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, and that's why, and I think you mentioned in Utah there was a lot of animosity between Mormons and Masons.
And so this was more over the martyrdom of Joseph.
I think that was Brigham's problem with it. Now, you have several people that came over, and like Lucius Scoville, for example, wanted to continue Masonry in Utah. But Brigham Young kind of shot that idea down because he thought that it would not work very well. And I think it's in part because he was so upset about the treatment they had received from Masons back in Illinois. But let's see where I was going with that.
Well, I know for a long time, if you were a Mormon, you couldn't become a Mason here in Utah.
Right. And so, okay, I know where I was going with that. So it was quite strange to have that happen, because usually you will take any religion, Masonry should take any religion and make them a better Muslim, Mormon, whatever. And so for them to say, no, we're not going to have any Mormons, particularly because you are religion we don't agree with, was very un-Masonic. And so that's one of the things that later on, many years later, they said, we can't be doing this. So now there are Mormon Masons in Utah. And in fact, the Grand Master of the Masonic Lodge in Utah is now a Mormon.
Oh, really?
Yes. So.
Yeah. Interesting. Starting to run out of questions here. Is there anything else that I've missed here that we should talk about with regards to Masonry?
Well, one thing I think is really interesting is that even though Brigham Young did not continue Masonry in Utah, we have a lot of the other breakoff groups that did continue Masonry. We look at the Strangites, and they had a temple ceremony that was very Masonic.
Oh, really?
Yes, they had almost the organization that they had was brought in from John Bennett, who had a great interest in
And
Masonry.
to my knowledge, there's no relation between me and John C. Bennett.
That's good. So yeah, they had a really interesting Masonic connection, which you can read about in my book as well. And then you have Alpheus.
So I didn't know the Stringites had a temple ceremony. That's interesting. And it was. Do we have any sense of how similar it was to the LDS?
We do, and it's it was very different from the LDS, but it was closer to Masonry. What they did a lot of things that remind you of the Council of 50. And that were Masonic, because the Council of 50 was very Masonic as well. And then you have Alpheus Cutler, who they also had temples, a temple ritual that was Masonic. And then Lyman White, when he went to Texas, brought over some Masonic elements. Temple. Yeah, not necessarily in his temple ritual, but he brought some Masonic elements into his group. So you see the importance of Masonry was continued in many of these groups.
Very interesting. I didn't know anything about the Stringites. I didn't even know they had a temple. Did they have a temple?
Yeah, they did.
And so they did endowments, sealings, everything that the LDS do? Do you know? They
didn't get very far along before he was killed in that, but they did crown him as the imperial primate, and he was crowned in much the same way as Joseph Smith was crowned in the Council of 50, and then they had a building that they were going to be using for temple. We don't know too much about what their actual ritual would be.
So did they build a temple, or they were planning to build?
They
a
were
temple?
building a temple.
They were building it when he died. Okay, very interesting.
If you have Prime, you can get a year of Grubhub Plus free. That means $0 delivery fees on Grubhub and Seamless. So activate Grubhub Plus and start saving. Delivery just got more delicious.
All right. Well, anything else you have?
No, that's good.
All right. Well, Cheryl Bruno, thanks again for participating here on Gospel Tangents.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So it's so interesting, especially because I have Dan Vogel on my head, that you're telling me that Kirtland had Masonic. I was like, what? And then
so you know what I have in my book?
And Council of 50.
The thing about Kirtland is they had Danites.
They did?
They had Danites in Kirtland. And that's what people don't. People are going to be really shocked when they read about this in my book, because I have lots of evidence.
Well, you're supposed to give me the shocking stuff. Do I need to turn the camera back on?
We'd have to go all the way back to the Kirtland part. It doesn't fit in.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed our conversation with historian Cheryl Bruno. So I want to encourage everybody to go out and buy her book when it comes out. Be the first one. So I'm going to be the first in line, I'll tell you that. It's going to be a fantastic book. It's called Method Infinite, and it's by Greg Coford Books. So it should be coming out here in the next couple of months. So check it out. And Cheryl, I just want to thank you for spending so much time talking with us and learning more about your book. Really appreciate that, Cheryl. In our next conversation, I'm excited to introduce Claire Barris. He's been studying Mormon history on the internet longer than anybody I know.
To show my ancientness, I was actually online in 1984 on the internet when only engineering firms and universities were on the internet.
That's what I thought.
Very briefly, but in 88 I got on, and I've been on consistently ever since. In 88 it would take a week to get email from here to the East Coast, just to give you a sense of how primitive it was. And so, yeah, I'm an old dinosaur.
Was this like Prodigy or AOL or something else?
It was before. I remember when AOL and Prodigy came online. This was pre anything. You had to work at an engineering firm, and some universities had access.
So like the ARPANET?
Oh yeah, it was the ARPANET. Yeah,
oh,
it was
wow.
It was pre-internet. It was the ARPANET.
Wow.
Yeah.
If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, please subscribe to patreon.com/gospel tangents. And for just $5 a month, you can hear the entire interview without any interruption. If you'd like a paperback version of our transcripts, go to amazon.com and do a search for Gospel Tangents interview. Also, if you'd like to give the money to me and not Amazon, please subscribe on my website, and I'll be able to send you a transcript as soon as they are completed, and click the subscribe button. You can also find our latest information on Facebook.
Hello? Okay, I have more videos to watch. Just give me 1 second. Just give me a second and I will get them for you. I have 2 more videos for us to watch. I still have more work to get done, but I'm just gonna, whatever. I'm not gonna get it all done today, but I'm not doing any more Mormonism. Okay, we're gonna see. We're gonna see Joseph's Magical Masonry. Hold on. Joseph's Magical Masonry. Okay.
Some families you're born into, some find each other instead, over morning games, celebrating the wins, and knowing that every day is better.
Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. Many people in the 19th century believed magic was real. They weren't parlor tricks like David Copperfield. They believed that magic was real. In our next conversation with historian Claire Barris, we're going to talk about how these beliefs affected Joseph Smith and his use of magic circles in search of buried treasure. Check out our conversation. Hey, I just wanted to mention one more thing. The Mormon News Report podcast is an awesome podcast, and they cover the week in Mormon news with a healthy dose of snark and commentary. Join Brant and Jenny every Monday to get caught up on all those news stories that you can stay up to date on the latest Mormon news. So check out Mormon News Report. It's a great podcast. Brent and Jenny are great friends. Now back to our conversation. All right. So where do we go from here?
Well, okay. So I think I've kind of covered, kind of gone through the basics of parallels between cryptic and Royal Arch Masonry and kind of this Enoch. We do have a book of Enoch that Joseph Smith soon produces, which can be tied to the cryptic rite and Enoch and his writings, and the translation, the plates, and the idea of buried scripture coming forth. And we could talk a bit about some magic and what I see as Masonic magic intersections with early Mormonism. So
let's go there.
Okay. All right. So I've got 2 main things that I think are interesting that I've looked into. So a lot of people have heard of the phrase the faculty of Abrac. That Lucy Mack Smith, when she was writing her kind of family memoir, she had several drafts, and we have the earlier drafts. And in this early draft, she says something to the effect, well, we didn't spend all of our time trying to win the faculty of Abrac or soothsaying or drawing magic circles. We did attend to our business and got it and took care of it. That's it in essence. Which is, and then the next draft, and then she doesn't go on, and then the next draft there's nothing. So we have this tantalizing tidbit, and it's interesting to go, what in the world is she talking about? Well, we know, of course, the Smiths were heavily involved in treasure seeking, And this phraseology is, I believe, about treasure seeking, but it is also has a Masonic origin, and an interesting Masonic origin. So, abracadabra was a magic word, and it goes way, way back. And it probably had something to do with trying to conjure up the deity Abraxas, and you can find it. And it goes, you can find it in all sorts of books going way back. If you narrow that down, though, to the word abrac, so abracadabra, if you draw a triangle, a magic triangle, and the bottom line has abracadabra, and then it's a little shorter and shorter, and at the top is the letter A, that is a magic abracadabra triangle.
Yeah, I remember this, and you're going to send me your PowerPoint so I can put this in as part of the presentation.
Yeah.
So we'll be able to see this as we're talking. This is awesome.
Yeah, and I okay.
Oh, you already
check.
sent it to me.
I
That's
think
right.
you've got that.
You
Yes,
did
I
send
think
it
you
to
have
me.
that.
Yeah.
So in this abracadabra triangle, if you count up to the seventh, which has magic power, the seventh line from the bottom, you have the word abrac, and so it's got some special meaning. The interesting thing, though, is if you look in publications, before Joseph Smith, they only show up in Masonic works, including Winning the Faculty of Abrac, or just the word abrac. That is only in Masonic books. Turns out that it first shows up in, I think, in the 1750s, and it turns out that it is a forgery. Somebody wrote a forgery, and it's called the Leland manuscript. And so Leland, it's like, hey, I've got this document, and and his document is the account of John Locke from the 1600s finding a 1400s interview of King Henry VI, and King Henry VI is being asked about Masonry, and asks all these questions. Then King Henry VI answers them, and then John Locke. So this is the 1400s, right? And then John Locke in the 1600s writes his annotations, and then John Leland is presenting this in the 1700s, and it turns out it's a forgery. But it's interesting. It gets published in a Masonic book, and a lot of Masons take it seriously, and then it gets republished. And the way it's republished, it sounds like it's gospel truth for Masons. And what it does is it talks about magic elements of Freemasonry. So I do have, I'd like to read a little bit of that, and it's quite interesting. And it's in Old English. I've kind of transcribed it into modern English. I won't burden you with the Old English. It's really hard to understand. But it says, okay, what doth the Masons conceal and hide? Right, this is what the interviewer asks King Henry VI, and then he responds: they conceal the art of wonder working and of foresaying things to come, that so the same arts may not be used to a wicked or evil end. They also conceal the art of changes, the way of winning the faculty of abrac, the skill of becoming good and perfect without the helpings of fear and hope, and the universal language of Masons. I think that's 6 things. So he's saying the Masons are trying to hide this, to conceal these things. Okay, the art of wonder working, which is miracle working, right? The foresaying things to come, which is prophesying. The art of change. So remember, there's King Henry VI, but then you have John Locke gives some commentary on what he thinks it is. He ties that to alchemy, right? So alchemy is the art of changing metals, right? Usually to gold is the attempt, but it's not just this chemistry that's going on. In alchemy, there's also a whole philosophy about trying to become perfect, to perfecting humanity. And the interesting thing, so we have the art of change, we have this alchemy going on, but we also, remember the next sentence is the skill of becoming good and perfect without the helpings of fear and hope. Kind of, it's like, what in the world does that mean? Well, I think it has to do with, in alchemy, there's a way to become perfect without the fear and the strained hope that Puritans and Protestants went through. It was painful, especially back in those days, to be a Christian, and it was all about fear and like, I'm not going to make it. Well, here's a way to become perfect through alchemy and achieve immortality, right? So I think that's what that's talking about. Then there's the way of winning the faculty of Abrac, which they talk about, which is what shows up in Lucy Mack Smith's work later. And then there's the universal language of Masons. This is the idea that there was a Masonic language that all Masons of different countries shared, and that it might have some special properties. Well, all right, so we can dive into a few of these. So remember, Lucy Mack Smith talks about soothsaying, that one of the things that they were involved in was soothsaying. Well, soothsaying literally means predicting the future. Well, in the Leland manuscript, they call it foresaying things to come. It's literally the same thing as soothsaying. So we have Lucy Mack Smith is repeating the faculty of Abrac, and she's repeating the essence of what it means to be a soothsayer, which is foretelling things to come. Joseph Smith was known to be a fortune teller. Before he was a prophet, he would tell fortunes. That's one of the things that he was known for. And I think that the difference between a prophet and a soothsayer is really on the spectrum of magic to religious. And I actually think Joseph Smith evolved from a soothsayer to a prophet over time as his shift in emphasis changed, So Lucy says they were involved in soothsaying. The Leland manuscript has them talking about foresaying things to come. And then we have winning the faculty of Abrac. Well, here, this is what's tied to that abracadabra magic triangle. So this was used for a number of things in magic circles, one of which was to conjure spirits. So Joseph Smith did a number of things, and one thing that it seems he was doing when he was trying to recover treasure is to control the spirit that was guarding the treasure, or that was trying to prevent them from recovering the treasure. We don't have any specific information on the word abracadabra in Joseph Smith's treasure seeking, but we do know that they used magic words when trying to recover these. And we know that the parchments, the magic parchments, Smiths had 3 of those, and they have magic words on those. And those were used to try to control spirits. That was one of the purposes of these layman's, they're called, or magic parchments. So that's kind of a brief.
Is that spelled the same way as layman in the Book of Mormon?
It is. So I don't know if there's a relationship there, but it's possible. But we'll shift here and talk about layman's when you'd like to. So let me talk. So briefly, we have these intersections that we've gone over now in 1828. So this faculty of Abrac and soothsaying stuff is in all these Masonic works from 1750 up to Joseph Smith's time. In 1828, in the frenzy, in the aftermath of the see, it's getting late. You can tell my recollection is not what it is. The Morgan affair. Mm-hmm. 2 years later, that was in 1826. In 1828, anti-Masonic stuff is going crazy, and Dana Ward is an anti-Mason, and he does something very interesting that gives us some clues into the relationship of treasure seeking and Masonry from this forged Leland manuscript that they don't know at this time is a forgery, but he pokes fun at Masons being unable to do any magic. And you remember Hiram Abiff from Masonic legend. He pokes fun. So I'm going to read a little bit here. Dana Ward, he wonders, making fun very sarcastically, why Hiram did not foresee his danger. Remember, foreseeing things was one of the things in the Leland manuscript. Why the master of the art of wonder working, that's also in the Leland manuscript, did not even draw a magic circle. Magic circle is not in the Leland manuscript, but it is something that the Smiths did and other treasure seekers when trying to recover a buried treasure. When they wanted to, when you draw a magic circle with a dagger, and the Smiths had a ceremonial dagger with an occult symbol in it that was almost quite likely used for drawing magic circles in the ground. And when a magician would draw a magic circle, it was used to either keep spirits out or keep them in, or to protect the magician that was in the circle, or protect others that were in the circle. It was creating a magical barrier that couldn't be crossed.
And so when you're saying magician, you're not using that in the today's term where it's just a guy who does,
no, this is not parlor tricks.
Yeah, this is actually, they believe they were doing magic.
Yes, this is ceremonial magic. And this is something the Smiths did. They used and if we want, I can read a very interesting quote about Joseph Smith Sr. Well, I'll just summarize it. Joseph Smith Sr. Drawing 2 magic circles, and then he puts rods of witch hazel sticks around the 2 circles, and then in the very center he draws in a rod of iron. And what he's really doing is creating a cone. There's an outer circle and an inner circle, and then a point, and it's supposed to represent a 3D cone going down into the ground, holding the treasure at this point inside of this cone. And then Joseph Smith Sr. walks around the circle 3 times, and he's described as muttering. Well, he's probably using magic words, a spell, something, some kind of ceremonial magic to. And maybe the word abracadabra might have been part of it. We don't know, or abrac or something. But and then that's supposed to help the treasure, protect it from the spirits. He then goes into the house and asks Joseph Smith, who is looking in his seer stone in the hat, and he says, "Joseph, how come we could?" Oh, and then they dig. They had dug, and there's no treasure, and they go in the house. Joseph, what happened? He says, and he's been watching the spirit interacting with this cone, these magic circles that Joseph Smith Sr. has drawn. And Joseph said that that the spirit was able to get the treasure and move it through the earth, and they lost it, and that they had done some part of the ritual they made a mistake in, and that's why they lost the treasure. It's a fascinating account. I can't remember if it's William Stafford that wrote this. But it's a fascinating account, and it gives you very detailed into what the Smiths would do. Well, so I've detoured us out of Dana Ward's quote about magic circles because I wanted to explain that. But let me go back to Dana Ward. Remember, he says he wonders why Hiram Abiff did not foresee the danger. This soothsayerism. The master of wonderworking did not even draw a magic circle, right? So that's what we were just talking about. The master of the way of winning the faculty of abrac did not utter a syllable of magic. Well, here we have Joseph Smith. He's muttering, probably magic words that seem to be, according to Dana Ward, tied to the faculty of Abrac. So it actually may have been, they may have used abracadabra. At least some of those people were using the faculty of Abrac to try to control these. You know, he's making fun of Hiram Smith. He got murdered. Why didn't he utter a syllable of magic? Why didn't he draw a magic circle? Why didn't he exercise some wonder working? And then Ward says, why did he not even make the slightest attempt to conjure a spirit to his rescue? Well, the Smiths had these 3 magic parchments, laymans, and the symbols on the most important one, the Holiness to the Lord magic layman, has symbols that say something to the effect, whoever possesses this will be able to control spirits, or that spirits will do their bidding. And another of the symbols has to do with that they'll be able to summon a spirit. So this parchment is important that the Smith family has, that they are probably using in these ceremonies to try to do this. So basically we have an intersection of Mormonism, Joseph Smith very early on, and magic and Masonry, right? That kind of confluence. I hope I was able to convey that.
Clearly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with historian Claire Barris. Our next conversation with him is going to be our last, and so it's only going to be available to newsletter subscribers. So subscribe to our newsletter for free at gospeltangents.com/newsletter so you don't miss our next conversation with Claire.
There's a couple of paradigms I don't care for, and I think there are valid paradigms that work with Joseph Smith and all of these facts of church history that work well. But black and white, true and false, all that, I think we need to reject that and say, you know what, prophets are human, and they made some mistakes.
If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, please subscribe to patreon.com/gospeltangents. And for just $5 a month, you can hear the entire interview without any interruption. If you'd like a paperback version of our transcripts, go to amazon.com and do a search for Gospel Tangents interview. Also, if you'd like to give the money to me and not Amazon, please subscribe on my website, and I'll be able to send you a transcript as soon as they are completed.
Okay, hello. Okay, I have one more video to show. Just give me a second. Okay, is the Book of Mormon anti-Masonic? I didn't show this yet right now.
Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best.
Oh. Wait, hold on. Oh, there's more. Wait, hold on. Give me 1 second. Okay, here it is.
For years, one company has battled to deliver business products the next day with no freight charges. Now, WB Mason, with their famous fleet of trucks and drivers, faces their biggest challenge, rescuing shipping and packaging buyers from expensive freight charges. That's right. Now, boxes, stretch film, and packaging tape are delivered the very next day at amazingly low prices. So, who do you call for fast delivery and no expensive freight charges? Who but WB Mason?
Five words you pronounce wrong 2 years before your brain starts shutting down. Dementia is now known as type 3 diabetes, according to the
Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. Many people in the 19th century believed magic was real. They weren't parlor tricks like David Copperfield. They believed that magic was real. In our next conversation with historian Claire Barris, we're going to talk about how these beliefs affected Joseph Smith and his use of magic circles in search of buried treasure. Check out our conversation. Hey, I just wanted to mention one more thing. The Mormon News Report podcast is an awesome podcast, and they cover the week in Mormon news with a healthy dose of snark and commentary. Join Brant and Jenny every Monday to get caught up on all those news stories that you can stay up to date on the latest Mormon news. So check out Mormon News Report. It's a great podcast. Brant and Jenny are great friends. Now back to our conversation. All right. So where do we go from here?
Well, okay. So I think I've kind of covered, kind of gone through the basics of parallels between cryptic and Royal Arch Masonry and kind of this Enoch. We do have a book of Enoch that Joseph Smith soon produces, which can be tied to the cryptic rite and Enoch and his writings, and the translation, the plates, and the idea of buried scripture coming forth. And we could talk a bit about some magic and what I see as Masonic magic intersections with early Mormonism. So
let's go there.
Okay, all right. So I've got two main things that I think are interesting that I've looked into. So a lot of people have heard of the phrase the faculty of Abrac. That Lucy Mack Smith, when she was writing her kind of family memoir, she had several drafts, and we have the earlier drafts. And in this early draft, she says something to the effect, well, we didn't spend all of our time trying to win the faculty of Abrac or soothsaying or drawing magic circles. We did attend to our business and got it and took care of it. That's it in essence. Which is, and then the next draft, and then she doesn't go on, and then the next draft there's nothing. So
Wait, did we just watch that? No, nothing. That sounds like we just watched that. No. Okay. Why is it? Wait, hold on. What happened? Wait, hold on. No. Just give me 1 second. Let me look at something. That was 411. Hold on. I'm just trying to. Hold on.
It's the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. Many people in the 19th century,
right? Then John Locke in the spear that the
Wait, these look like the same. 411. And what am I playing right now? No, I have to. No, sorry. I did something wrong. Hold on. Hold on. 408. Okay, wait. Okay, yes, this should be something different.
The first person to survive Alzheimer's disease is out there.
Hi, I'm Andrea from Lemoore, California, and you're watching Gospel Tangents, your best source for Mormon history, science, and theology.
I'm Rick Bennett. Historian Dan Vogel has said the Book of Mormon is an anti-Masonic book. However, in our previous interview with Cheryl Bruno, she disputed that idea. I'm going to ask the same question to Claire Barris. Where does he stand? You won't want to miss this conversation. Check it out. Hey, I just wanted to mention one other thing. Beyond the Blocks is an awesome podcast, and it seeks to center the narratives of the marginalized in conversations on Mormonism. A Black lifelong member and queer theologian, Brother Jones and Brother Knox, seek to fill the gaps between Mormon theology and Mormon culture that find all kinds of identities may claim a seat at the table of Christ. So check out Beyond the Block. It's a great podcast. Now back to our conversation. We've got some masonry going on at this time. Is that right? How do we tie masonry in with all this sort of stuff, or is it not?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So let's back up to Oliver Cowdery. So we talked about the New Israelites. That disbands. William Cowdery then gets involved in Freemasonry, and we have a few records that give us some very interesting clues. So he became a member of a Mark Masters Royal Arch Lodge, is what it's called, and in there we have records that he was for a while a master overseer, and then later a junior warden. And so in a Royal Arch Lodge, the master overseer, they, in the ceremonies, the initiate who's going through the ceremony, they come to what's called the third veil, and they've learned some signs and tokens. In fact, that one of the tokens has to do with a rod, interestingly enough. And then they go presumably to William Cowdery, Oliver Cowdery's father, and they give him the right signs and tokens, and he lets them through the third veil, and then they go into the Grand Council. That's what it's called. Now, William Cowdery's father then later gets promoted to junior warden. As the junior warden of a Royal Arch Lodge, plays the part of the third member of the Grand Council. And so as the third member of the Grand Council, he would be the prophet scribe. It was the scribe, but it was I think in mimicking, it might have been Haggai or one of the prophets that was a scribe. And so there's a high priest, a king, and a scribe. So interestingly, Joseph Smith ends up spending a lot of emphasis on prophet, priest, and king later in Nauvoo. Well, in the Masonic Royal Arch ritual, we have prophet, high priest, and we have a prophet, scribe, high priest, and king, which is interesting. The Grand Council is at the end of the Royal Arch ritual. They talk about that someday we will the initiate that's going through the ceremony will go into the grand council in heaven, that they'll pass through the veil in heaven to the real, true heavenly grand council, and they call this the ceremony of exaltation, which is interesting. So we have a few Mormon-y words. We've got
or Masony, right?
Masony, or Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saint-y words, or
we can't use that anymore.
Yes, I'm trying to correct that. Sorry, I get carried away sometimes. We have Grand Council, which later I think Joseph Smith uses Grand Council as the council in the pre-existence, and then of course exaltation is something that is on top of salvation. It's the celestial kingdom objective. And it's interesting that we have this terminology in the Royal Arch Masonic ritual. Also, so you've got and we'll talk a little bit more about the ritual. While I'm thinking of it, let me mention that the head of a Royal Arch Lodge can go into it, and I ought to see if I can find this in my notes so I can get it right. It's the I don't know if I can find it, but it's the Order of Melchizedek, which it's called, or the Holy and Anointed Order, something like that. And if you want, I can thumb through my notes.
Sure.
Okay.
So here's where I'd like to go. So it's interesting to me that you are telling me that Warren Cowdery and Oliver Cowdery were involved.
William Cowdery.
Just William, not Oliver?
Not all. Yeah, Oliver was not involved in Masonry at this point. Later, he becomes a Mason. We don't know when he first became a Mason. It was probably after he fell out with Joseph Smith. There's a very slight, very slight chance that he could have been one before Joseph Smith, but it seems unlikely. It's kind of a stretch. But the age, we don't know when he became one. But later, he helps organize a lodge, and so which suggests he had some Masonic experience because he's immediately a lodge officer.
What year is this lodge?
This is going to be in the 1840s, somewhere I think after Joseph.
So, and just to remind people on kind of the time frame. So Oliver's the second elder on April 6, 1830. Joseph's the first, Oliver's the second. So by 1835, we have an issue where he accuses Joseph of adultery with Fanny Alger, or Alger. I don't know how you say her name anymore. Brian's messing me up.
Yeah, Alger, or Algers,
or Alger. I heard Alger too. Yeah.
Either with or without an S.
Yeah.
So there's four possible pronunciations.
So at any rate, so we look at Fanny as being the first first plural wife after Emma. Emma catches him in the barn. Anyway, I need to talk to Don Bradley about that. But so Oliver accuses Joseph of adultery with Fanny. Joseph denies the charge, and Oliver's excommunicated. And I believe this is 1835. Do you know?
Or 36, or 36. Somewhere in that realm, 36. I believe.
So Oliver's out of the church, is excommunicated. So it's William, his father, was into Masonry, but we don't have any evidence that Oliver was doing Masonry at this time. So this is 1840, and that's about when Joseph was doing it. But Oliver doesn't join the church until long after Joseph dies, right?
Right. So sometime in the interim, after he gets kicked out, and sometime in the mid 1840s, I think after Joseph Smith has been murdered, Oliver shows up organizing a Masonic lodge, helping to organize a Masonic lodge. And he is an officer in the lodge.
Well, and I'm trying to see if there's a connection, because it sounded to me, but maybe I was reading things into it, but it sounded to me like you were trying to make a connection between William Cowdery and Masonry and Joseph Smith, but it sounds like there isn't really a connection.
Yeah. William Cowdery, Oliver's father. I'm saying that Oliver grew up under William Cowdery, and William Cowdery was heavily involved in Royal Arch Masonry and was involved in these rituals. And then, not only that, but then they moved to a town that I can't recall in Vermont, and Jeremy Cross shows up in town. And Jeremy Cross, while he's in this town that the Cowderies live in, we think that it looks like they may have overlapped, but they may not have. It's hard to tell. But he organizes the Cryptic Rite Masonry, which is a collection of degrees, while he's in the same town that the Cowderies possibly, at the same time the Cowderies are. It's possible that the Cowderies hadn't quite arrived, that they had left before he arrived, but it's during the same year. One group is coming in, the other one's going out, and it's hard to tell how much overlap there was. Okay. But anyway, there's a possible overlap of Cryptic Rite Masonry. William Cowdery was absolutely into the esoteric. He's a member of the Rodsmen of the New Israelites. He's into Masonry. He's gone through the craft Masonry, the first 3 degrees, and then he becomes a mark master, and then he goes into Royal Arch Masonry, and he becomes an officer in that. So he's pretty steeped in that. Oliver's growing up. Oliver's uncle is also involved in Masonry, and so then, the point is, it may or may not have filtered to Oliver, and it may or may not have filtered to Joseph Smith.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to see.
It's just interesting that he's involved, but it does help tell the story. Whether or not there is a transmission of information to Joseph Smith is either neither here nor there. It's helping to tell the story of Royal Arch Masonry, but it's fun to tell the story with William Cowdery as a player within that.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
So, one of the things that Dan Vogel claims is that the Book of Mormon is very anti-Masonic. Mm-hmm. And so, but yet in the 1840s, Joseph Smith is embracing Masonry.
Yes.
So do you agree, number one, that the Book of Mormon is anti-Masonic?
Well, I have the benefit of having listened to Cheryl on your podcast earlier, and so I'm cheating because I've heard her answer, and she knows more than I do. But I do know about this. There's 2 forms of Masonry according to George Oliver, who has some fascinating parallels with what Joseph Smith is Mormonism. And in that there's a spurious Masonry, and then there's pure Masonry. And the story goes clear back to the time of Adam. Well, God is the original Mason, and he architects the universe. And then he creates Adam.
So this is a Masonic tale that you're telling me right now?
This is a Masonic tale, yes.
Okay.
And then he creates Adam, and then he tells Adam the true word, the ineffable word, which is kind of the secretive name of God. He tells Adam the word, and it's called in Masonry the word, or the ineffable word. And then Adam passes that down, almost kind of like priesthood, passes it down through his genealogical lines, and it goes clear down to the time of Solomon, and they end up with it, and then they lose it. Long story short, the keeper of the word gets murdered, and they lose the word, and it's lost. And we'll talk about this word here in a bit. But Cain breaks off and creates a spurious, evil, bad, misappropriated Masonry, and he starts this line of kind of adulterated Masonry, spurious Masonry, if I understand it right. And I'm oversimplifying, and I hope Cheryl's not shaking her head going, "Oh man, Claire's kind of got it right." But I'm kind of this is not my
when we post
expertise.
This, she can weigh in on it.
She can weigh in on it. Yes, but that's generally speaking correct. So now you go to 18. You go to the story of William Morgan, 1826. He is going to publish an expose of Masonry. The Masons supposedly freak out. William Morgan goes to jail in Canandaigua, just a few miles south of the Smiths. Joseph Smith Sr. happens to be serving time there for some debt. I think it's debt-related issues. And And then later the Masons bail out William Morgan. When he steps out of jail, they arrest him. They take him up to one of the Great Lakes. They toss him in. So the story goes. We don't know the details, but this is kind of the story that percolates out. Well, then the whole nation freaks out about anti-Masonry, and they start, and they have an anti-Masonic convention in the very first one in Seneca, New York. That should ring a bell. That's over by where the Whitmers are hanging out. This is before the church is organized, but this is maybe 1827. I'd have to check, but it's right in that time frame. And then anti-Masonic conventions start popping up all over the place, and they're calling Masonry secret combinations, is a term commonly used. And in fact, that's showing up in the paper in Palmyra, the word secret combinations being associated with Masonry. Well, this word also shows up in the Book of Mormon, secret combinations, to talk about these secret oath-bound groups that are using their secretiveness to get gain and to damage the government. And so at the same time, there's a big Andrew Jackson is running for president, and so he's a Mason, and I'm hoping I'm getting these details right. I'm getting them close. He's running for president, so his opposition is like, well, hey, he's a Mason. Holy crap, you can't vote for a guy like that because he's bad news, And anyway, this Masonic fervor, anti-Masonic fervor, spreads into politics and into the election, and so it's huge, and the whole nation's freaking out. They're thinking that Masons are controlling the government, and it's You think we got conspiracy theories these days in politics? Well, it was really bad back then too.
Well, yeah. Well, the thing that always bugs me is because our founding fathers were Masons, and so George Washington was a Mason. I believe Thomas Jefferson was a Mason. Like, everybody was a Mason. The Constitution used a lot of Masonic principles, and so it's interesting that in 1791, when George Washington is the president, until I don't remember exactly the year that Andrew Jackson was elected, probably 1828, I believe, somewhere
like
around
that.
there, in that time frame. So we go from the founders of our nation are good Masons to this William Morgan murder, and now they're public enemy number one.
Right. And it was an overreaction. Sure, these Masons were upset about William Morgan trying to expose their Masonic secrets, but the overreaction was bad. That happens in the world all the time. Overreaction is often worse than what they're originally reacting to. So in the Book of Mormon, you have this anti-Masonic stuff popping up. There's two ways to interpret it. It's either anti-Masonry or it's anti-spurious Masonry, right? And I don't know how.
Yeah, we've got good Masonry
distinction.
and bad Masonry, essentially, right?
Yeah. And Joseph, and I don't know if it's which one it is. I just don't know. But there is anti-Masonic terminology in the Book of Mormon, and it's portrayed as and then immediately after the Book of Mormon is published, the Book of Moses gets translated, and the story picks up. And Cain, between the Book of Mormon and the Book of Moses, Cain is the original Master Mahon. Okay, so you take an H and you turn it to an S, and you have Master Mason, and you've got these oath-bound secrets, and you have killing to get gain, which is what they thought the Masons were doing, and so you have this evil personified in the Book of Mormon and the Book of Moses, which is a very curious parallel to what's going on in the national paranoia anti-Masonic fervor. I mean, it's a curious parallel, which seems to suggest that well, it depends on how you look at the Book of Mormon. But if you think it was some of that came from the ideas in Joseph Smith's time, then there's a good case to say that Master Mahon and Master Mason are kind of talking about the same thing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with historian Claire Barris. In our next conversation, we're going to talk about some Masonic legends that sound very similar to a famous movie I'm sure you've heard of.
And some people come going through the temple rubble, masons, and they find a stone lid, which is the lid that Enoch had created, which is the entrance to the cryptic temple. They open up that stone lid and they
Okay. Hold on. Okay, I'm going to show you the last one. And then I'm totally done with Mormonism and Masonry and Judeo-Freemasonry. And here it is. Last video, and then we're done with Mormonism.
Can't go? Do this to clear out stuck poop fast. Fiber helps you poop, right?
Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. There will be many Latter-day Saints who are surprised about these early magic and masonry connections to early Mormonism. Can they be reconciled? In our next conversation with historian Claire Barris, we'll talk about how he reconciles it and how he thinks that believing faithful Latter-day Saints can reconcile some of these early beliefs and practices. Check out our conversation.
Okay, so maybe we can move on to the other part of what I consider to be kind of an intersection of masonry and magic. So back to these laymen's, and you'll have to show a picture of the holiness to the Lord layman. So the layman, this layman is actually gold colored. It has a gold backing on it. And the reason it has gold on it is to mimic the gold plate. So the word layman actually means plate, which is an interesting thing. We've got a lot of plates that we've been talking about, especially gold plates. We have Enoch's gold plate. Suddenly we have Joseph Smith's magic parchment, which is literally a gold plate, a layman. And we have the gold plates from the Royal Arch Masonic myth. So we have now we're going to talk about more gold plates. So magicians would take this layman or plate, and they would mimic Aaron in the Old Testament. Aaron was told that he would have to wear this ceremonial garb. And so one thing he'd wear is a breastplate. Now remember earlier we talked about the Masonic high priest would wear a breastplate. Aaron would wear a breastplate. Aaron would put the Urim and Thummim. The Urim and Thummim would be attached to his breastplate, to the breastplate. Aaron would also wear a gold plate on his forehead inscribed with the words "Holiness to the Lord." Okay, so we have Joseph Smith's gold colored, or partially gold colored at least. We only have black and white images, but it has gold color. That's the holiness to the Lord. It also has other manifestations of the name of God, which is similar to what we were talking about earlier, the Masonic lost name of God and how they're trying to restore that. Well, these lamans have various wordings of the name of God inscribed on them. So a magician would wear either a layman on his forehead when doing magic, but there are other references where they wear the layman as a breastplate. And so here's where I think it's interesting. Joseph Smith, when he translates well, Joseph probably, when he is doing his stuff with spirits and buried treasure, probably has the lamens with him. Now, the lamens would fold in half and then in half again, and they were, when they're folded twice, they were 4 inches by 4 inches, and he had a leather pouch that was 4 by 4, and you could slide the lamens in, and it has a fairly lengthy strap. Now, if Joseph Smith was using this as magicians sometimes did, and this is in the most popular book on magic by Barrett, called the Magus. It's published in 1801, and it lit America on fire with magic, because it imported all this magic ideology from Europe and published it in America. And there was a surge in magic in America because of Francis Barrett's the Magus. And in there it talks about the magician wearing this thing on his forehead, a layman on his forehead. I found some other references, though, to magicians wearing them on their chest as a plate, and a gold, which would have been a gold-plated breastplate. And so, looking at the length of the strap of the pouch that held the lamens, it seems more likely Joseph Smith would have worn that around his neck than around his forehead, because it's a lengthy strap. Makes more sense that it was down over here. It wouldn't surprise me if it's something he could have worn it just without people seeing, under his shirt while he was doing his conjuring of spirits and trying to do the treasure seeking stuff. I kind of wonder, here's my speculation, if this is something he used in translation. So we know that there was a breastplate that was used in translation. I'm wondering if it could be this magician's breastplate, the holiness to the Lord layman, that is mimicking Aaron's breastplate that's described in the Old Testament, that was known to be used by other magicians at the time.
Seniors are getting an extra $2,000 from the senior stimulus program, but you can get it only if you...
Okay, so can you summarize?
Yeah, I'm going to actually read this paragraph, which summarizes the fake Leland manuscript successfully implanted the concept of hidden magical practices into the Masonic worldview beginning in the mid-1750s. Dana Ward's sarcastic 1828 critique reflects how the Leland manuscript concepts had been expanded to include the magic culture of the 1820s, a Masonic magic blend into which the Smith family seems to fit. Lucy Mack Smith's curious confession of her draft history, in her draft history, that this Masonic magic took up much of their time, provides an intriguing key into understanding the relationship between Freemasonry and the treasure-seeking practiced by the Smiths. So that's my summary that I can read better than I can speak off the cuff, but I wanted to kind of encapsulate everything there. Yeah.
Well, interesting. All right. Well, do you have anything else you want to share with us as far as with Masonry and magic?
Well, I think we've kind of covered it all. I might think of some things
well, let me
a bit
ask
later.
You this kind of as a final wrap up. So I know, it seems like in early Mormonism, they didn't hide the fact that there were the temple ceremonies were very similar to Masonry, and in fact, they even said it was true Masonry. The endowment was true Masonry, that Joseph had fixed the corrupted Masonry.
Yeah.
Whereas now, in our day, we're almost embarrassed about the ties, and there are a lot of people who deny that there's even any connection between Masonry and our temple ceremonies.
Right. Yep. Yeah.
So what would you say to somebody who this is just a new thing. Is this something we should be worried about?
Well, no, we shouldn't be, but we probably, a lot of people probably are, and the reason is because, as I think a lot of people know, there's a vast gap between correlated church history, correlated truth through the correlation department, and what actually happened or what may have happened. We've been talking about a lot of speculative stuff tonight, but what you're talking about is pretty verifiable. There are certainly, there's no question that there is a solid relationship between the temple endowment and Freemasonry. That's rock solid.
And there are some dramatic differences too. I guess I should point that out. It's not like they're identical ceremonies by any stretch. They're in a lot of ways they're very different, but a lot of the symbols are the same, but the ceremonies are dramatically different.
Yes, right. And so when people come across uncomfortable church history truths or facts, it's problematic because we've been raised on correlated history, and the internet now provides an opportunity to have unvarnished material to ingest. And in the black and white paradigm in which the church presents everything, it's true or false, it's right or wrong, then we have a problem, I think, or there's a problem. It's setting people up for a problem and a potential failure. I don't think it will be that way several generations from now. I think the church is in the midst of trying to adjust to that. But I don't like the paradigm. There's a couple of paradigms I don't care for, and I think there are valid paradigms that work with Joseph Smith and all of these facts of church history that work well. But black and white, true and false, all that, I think we need to reject that and say, you know what, prophets are human, and they made some mistakes. The idea of a restoration of ancient truths, I think a better, the way I like to look at it is that Joseph Smith was a brilliant prophet in that he was repurposing the raw materials of the esoteric and the questions about the divine and the mystic and the religious, and he was a master at taking these raw ingredients that were right in front of him and building something better, something that spoke better to the people of his time. So we have this magic stuff. We have Masonry. We have Christianity. And I think Joseph takes these and builds something new out of them. And I think that is the prophetic, revelatory, creative thing that Joseph Smith does. He builds that. And then a little bit later, there's more stuff that is informing him, and more building blocks are suddenly visible to him, and he takes those and synergistically builds something out of that, and on and on and on. And it's couched in the terminology of restorationism, restoring ancient truths, and perhaps it is, but I think that another way to look at it is that it's building, it's using the raw materials to build Mormonism that speaks to people, that helps them reach to the divine, to answer the questions that everybody has asked from antiquity. And Joseph Smith is providing potential answers for us and helping us as we seek to try to figure out, what's going on this planet, why are we here, and what in the world is going on. So that's kind of how I see it. And with the Masonic temple connection, to me, that's a repurposing of Masonry into something that is more in line with the vision that Joseph Smith continues to uncover and build as he goes through his life. And this is the latest building and refashioning something from his environment into something new that spoke to those people and it speaks a lot to a lot of people today. And I think that's a better way of looking at these things.
Well, thanks a lot. Well, Claire Barris, I really appreciate you allowing me in your home and spending so much time talking about things. So.
It's great to have you. I appreciate you coming and taking the time.
All right. Thanks again.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with historian Claire Barris.
Okay. Hello? Yeah. All right. So guess what? We're done. We're done with Mormonism and Judeo-Freemasonry. Done. I'm not doing anything else. I have some more articles I have to post on it, but I'm done with the videos and the readings and stuff like that. And okay, so to sum up everything that we learned, there's definitely a connection between Freemasonry and Mormonism, Kabbalah and Mormonism, Judaism and Mormonism, Israel and Mormonism, lots of connections. And basically, the Mormons want to go Noahide. They've proven that. They want to say it's in our Book of Mormon too. And I think that the Mormon Church is going to go hook, line, and sinker for Noahidism. So next, I'm starting Christian Science. I'm not sure. I might start that tomorrow or the next day. But yeah, I got to start Christian Science. All right, guys. Thank you for watching all this time and following me through Mormonism and Judeo-Freemasonry. And I hope you've learned a lot, because I did. All right, bye.